Call to order and roll call, Glenn, please.
Certainly. Member Burns.
Here.
Member Danley.
Here.
Member Miller.
Here.
Member Ryder.
Here.
Member Russell.
Here.
Chair Peters.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Agenda item number 2, non-agenda item and visitors, public comment time. Mr. Cole, do we have anybody that wants to participate in the public comment, or?
Yes, we have at least one person, Mr. Chairman. Before we recognize Ms. Patricia Havrin, I'll just note that this time is for public comment. If you're joining us by Zoom, there at the bottom, if you can just use the raise hand button or the Q&A button, we're happy to recognize you and to give you a chance to comment. With that said, Mr. Chair, I'll recognize Ms. Havrin. Yes?
Thank you.
All right.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi. Thanks for letting me speak for 3 minutes. Appreciate it. I just wanted to give you a heads up that, again, you're going to be reviewing the short-term rental ordinance. It's my understanding. If you recall, about 4 years ago, the trustees were tasked with studying the issue. Subcommittee was formed. Subcommittee of the trustees came back and said this is a great thing for the community, STRs. A vote was taken after much discussion, as you know, and after the police chief got before the public and said never any problems. A vote was taken and it was allowed. It was passed. The STR ordinance, a pilot program ordinance was passed. However, even though it was passed, a pilot program ordinance came up that was so restrictive and cost prohibitive that no one has participated. It's 3 years later, and no one's participated. Really, in my opinion, it's a woman who charged $500 a night still found it too restrictive and cost prohibitive. So is this an ordinance that discriminates against everybody except the very wealthy? I don't know, but that discrimination thing is something to consider. Anyway, I want you to know that I'm here to answer any questions. I've hosted through Airbnb and VRBO. I know how the difference is between an investor-owned property, home sharing, or a primary resident that opens their home with some extra space. It's a good thing, and I think it's good for the community. I think you can find a fair and equitable compromise for the homeowner, the neighbor, the community. Say if it's only 2 weeks a year, somebody can do it. Or think of Lake Forest, the golf tournament, people are doing it. You can bring in tax money. It's just so many pluses. But the bottom line, if you need to remove me from the controversy because I didn't bow down to what I feel was a bully. I didn't bow down, and I should have. And I feel that now the town suffers because I didn't, because this ordinance was put in place. So if you need to exclude me, I understand it. I don't agree with it for whatever kind of thing Foster was. Oh, a shared driveway. Then it was an adjacent driveway, and we put up a fence. And oh, no, it had to be an adjacent driveway. It's 5 feet. If that's what you want to do, you have the power. You're in control. I just want it equitable for the whole community. Okay? If I need to bow out, that's fine. Just give them their property rights back. So I just want you to know that I'm here. Thanks. I think that was 3 minutes. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Aber. Any questions from the commissioners?
It's Havrin, by the way.
Hearing none, we appreciate your comments, ma'am.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Any other comments from the public tonight? Hearing none, let's go on to agenda item number 3, consideration of the November 18, 2020 PCZBA regular meeting minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review them? Any proposed changes or modifications?
I have this is George. I have 2 little changes. Both times that the votes were recorded where we took votes, there was an indication that 7 people voted, and we only have 6 members right now, so it should have been 6. And then also on page 4, under item number 5, fourth paragraph from the top, um, there's a sentence that says, in response to a request by member Russell, Mr. Freebell agreed that he is comfortable with not allowing additional accessory dwelling units in the north wing of his property, and I'm not asking about accessory dwelling units tucked up in that northern pole portion of lot 1. I was suggesting that no accessory structures, as garages, sheds, and the like, be tucked up in that portion. So that's that needs to be changed. I don't know if he responded with the words accessory dwelling units, but that's certainly not what I asked about.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Any other proposed changes or other revisions? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote?
Certainly. Member Danley.
Aye.
Member Miller.
Aye.
Member Ryder.
Aye.
Member Russell.
Aye.
Member Burns.
Aye.
And Chair Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. All right. Agenda item number 4, public hearing, 700 Mountain Front Yard Variation. Mr. Cole, if you could give us an overview, please.
Certainly, and actually, we do have the petitioners ready to present to us. I know Miss Ashley with Scott Byron is here with us, and then I believe there might be others as well. In this case, I've actually asked Miss Samantha Lennox to give the staff report on this item.
Thank you.
Sure. Should I share the new overview that we received, Glenn?
Yeah, if you would.
Okay.
Glenn, could I ask, just as George, could I ask a question first?
Sure.
Glenn, for clarification, right before I signed on, I noticed I don't carry my phone around with me all day, and I noticed that you sent out an email with additional material for this. And I just want to have a clarification in my mind before this presentation gets started, is the additional material that you sent out, because I never got a chance to look at it. Is that what we're about to see here? Because
Yes.
it looks like we're going to see a different plan. It looks like we're going to see a different plan than what was submitted in our packet.
I don't think it's a
Somewhat
different plan. I suppose I'll defer to Ashley on that, but I think it's just elevations that are intended to illustrate the plan that was provided with the application.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Are you seeing my screen?
Yeah, yes.
Yes. Okay, great. So the village had received an application from the homeowners at 700 Mountain Road for a front yard setback variation to build a new front stoop and steps. The front porch and steps would encroach on a total of 6 feet and 1 inch into the 30 feet front yard setback. Front steps are able to encroach on a maximum of 4 feet and 1 inch into the front yard setback, so the new stoop and steps together would need to surpass this by 2 feet and 1 inch. And here's an overview. I don't believe that this one is in the packet, but it shows the 4 feet allowable floor steps plus the 2 feet and 1 inch increase for the stoop and steps. And I also have the plan for the elevation as well, Glenn, if you'd want me to share that.
Yes, if you would.
Sure. Okay. So the east elevation here,
For the commission's reference, the south elevation is the front of the building.
Yeah. And that's, yeah, so this is south elevation, that's the front of the building.
And then Ms. Lennox, if you would, and I think there are a few renderings the applicant's architect shared with us as well. If we could go through those. I know those were only circulated earlier today, and we should make sure everyone has a chance to see those.
Yes. I'm going to stop sharing this and switch over. Okay. So here are the pictures that were sent to us as well.
So to make sure I understand, the encroaching steps are the not the ones we see at the front of the picture, right? Or are they? I thought you were pointing earlier to steps that were closer to the door from here, and that these bluestone steps were something else. No?
Yes, I believe so.
It looks like there's steps that go up to the doorway that are further back. I was just trying to square this picture with the rendering that you were just showing, the drawing that you were just showing. And I thought I saw on that rendering the two sets of stairs, one that's far forward and then one to where you were pointing. I don't know if others understand this better than I'm explaining it.
Maybe.
Yeah, I also agree. I'm a little bit, I guess, I don't say confused, but it's not clear to me exactly where the variation starts and where it ends, kind of from a top view perspective.
Yeah, if we could go back to maybe the first drawing for a minute, and I'll try to explain to you what I'm showing.
If I can interject, I'm Elliot Claus from Morganti Wilson Architects.
Hi.
Not sure if I'm stepping out of.
Elliot, if I may interject before, if I could just swear you in before you start your presentation.
Okay.
Elliot?
Yes.
Yeah, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
And if you could state your name for the record, please.
Sure. It's Elliot Claus with Morganti Wilson Architects.
All right.
So I just wanted to make a quick statement because it seemed like no one's presented. Like we're trying to review it at the moment without an actual presentation yet. So I didn't know what the procedure was for moving forward with this. But I don't know if Scott Byron's team wants to present first.
We would like to present.
Yeah, I was just about to suggest if there's confusion about those drawings, we should probably turn it to our applicants. So apologies for the misstep.
And I would like to ask, again, just so I'm not struggling to try and compare the plan views that are in our packet with what's being presented graphically, but I'm almost certain that what the plan view is not matching what we're being shown now. And if the plans have changed since the packet went out, it would just help clear my mind anyway, so that I'm not trying to reference information that is no longer applicable. So if the presenters could, at the get-go, clarify whether or not what we have in our packet is still valid, because our packet shows a 4.5-foot tall planter at the leading edge, and I'm not seeing that at the far edge of the front extension. I'm not seeing that in these drawings that we've seen so far. So anyway, please do clarify that.
Yeah, who will be the presenter? Who's the petitioner?
John will be presenting, John Farah.
Okay. John, if you could state your name for the record, and then we'll swear you in.
Good evening. I'm John Sarah, Director of Sales with Scott Byron Landscaping.
Okay, John, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, John?
Yes.
Okay, please proceed.
So I'd like to begin the presentation as we had hoped and planned for your review. So I'd like to just take it a step back for a quick moment, and then we can handle the Q&A. So first and foremost, good evening to all. Scott Byron and Company is represented by my teammate, Marilyn, who is the lead architect on this project. Also Ashley, who has been all over this as well. This is a shared quest at 700 Mountain Road with Morganti Wilson that Elliot has already spoke on. So our pursuit is worked in tandem. What we would like to do is give you a quick synopsis on the existing site. Looked pre-construction. We're going to run you through a PowerPoint. I'm not sure exactly. I was trying to quickly make out what plans you were referring to in that question. However, let us run through this quick synopsis of PowerPoint, and then we do have the subject matter experts readily available, which Marilyn will speak on Scott Byron and Company's architectural behalf, and then Elliot to represent Morganti Wilson, who is the architect of the home and general contractor. So the variance package on behalf of 700 Mountain was intentionally and strategically outlined a certain way. The challenge quickly became for us as we entered into a landscape architectural arena of how we get the client today from the elevation of those front doors down to ground level. So the client's ask of us was to make this aesthetically pleasing and also coincide with Morganti Wilson's effort. So what we would like to present to you is this PowerPoint slideshow, and I can just quickly give you a run through. It'll create a backstory, a narrative, and just an overall synopsis for everyone. And then I'd just like to open the forum up to Q&A, if that's okay. So
Yep.
What we are looking at right now is a complete rendered plan, which highlights the aesthetic and how the overall landscape will coincide with the pursuit for this variance and how it relates to the front door and getting the client down to ground level. This is a final product. We feel that the aesthetic honors the Lake Bluff overall look and tradition. We can review this further, and you guys will have this accessible anytime. The next slide will show us, once Ashley moves that, this slide will show us a direct effort in our pursuit. This outlines steps and the elevated planter walls, everything in red here. This is specific to the construction of the architectural component and also for Morganti Wilson. So next slide. So these are the pre-construction photos, just to get this in everyone's mind's eye. This is how the home looked before Morganti Wilson broke ground. Ashley will run us through a couple photos here. These are the pre-construction photos, so that we all have this as fresh in our mind as possible, which brings us then to how it looks today in the current construction aspect of this project. So that set of steps there along the wall kind of sets a scale for you, a visual aid as to the height difference from the front door down to ground level. And here's another angle for that scenario. This is a finished product. This is a design rendering. This is ultimately how the home will look, how the landscape, specific to this variance, how the landscape architectural component will ultimately play out with the steps, the walk, and the elevated planter boxes. Here's another perspective as we add landscaping elements to it to soften it and adhere to the Lake Bluff aesthetic. and that completes the PowerPoint presentation. So I guess before we just completely open it up to Q&A, let's address the first question that was on the table. I feel that Elliot has a unique perspective and also has been working on this project. So I'm going to, if we're going to tackle that question, Elliot is a subject matter expert as that relates to the question. Should we tackle that question first?
At some point, we'll have to go through the standards for variation. I don't know if you want to do that now or let Elliot present to provide us with a little more background information and then come back and get into the standards.
Sure, I'd welcome Elliot's comments.
Sure. So to respond to one of George's questions in the beginning about, seems like we're seeing something different from what was submitted. What Scott Byron submitted earlier in the presentation was kind of a red outline sketch of just the front stoop, planter beds, and the steps. What you are seeing here now I think with the email that was sent out earlier today, just is a rendered, more of a landscape plan to show how that front stoop and steps incorporate into what Scott Byron's proposing to do with the landscaping. So you can kind of see an overall picture, but what we're trying to get for a variance is what's extended into the front yard setback for the just the leading edge of this stoop and stairs. The difference between the front door elevation between the original existing home and where it's at now. The existing home had a 6'8" basement ceiling height, and it was the owner's desire to get a taller ceiling in the basement, make it more usable and more comfortable to be in that space. So in doing so, we raised the first floor up, and the front door had to go with that. Ashley, if you don't mind showing the first floor plan that I had sent you this afternoon for some reference. So Ashley, if you can kind of zoom into that whole front entry hall area. One of the challenges we had when we raised the first floor up to get a taller basement ceiling is the front foyer was already a sunken foyer in the original house. And when we raised everything up, we kept the same footprint. And so the existing original house had already 7 steps to get up to the first floor. And so because of code, we couldn't add additional steps to keep that front door at a lower elevation because we'd run into code issues with having applicable landing space at the bottom of those stairs in the foyer. So when we pulled the first floor up, we were forced to kind of bring that front door up as well. And given the odd shape of the lot, Ashley, if you can go to the survey for showing the buildable area. The lot is actually quite large, but it's an odd shape where it goes to a point on the west side of the property. And with a ravine being as part of the property, it really cuts down the buildable area on the property. So the original house is set very close to the front setback of our buildable area. And so with the higher elevation of the first floor and front foyer with the entry door, that required additional steps coming out from the front door. So Ashley, if you can actually zoom all the way out to see the entire blue outline, which is the actual piece, the full extent of the property. And then the area highlighted in red is based on the ravine setbacks, the actual buildable area for that piece of property with the existing house on site. So John, do we want to kind of go through the items of the variation next?
Can you elaborate on that? I don't understand the format you're seeking here. The items of the variation, is that what was said?
Yeah, John, there's some standards the PCZBA needs to find that the application has satisfied to grant this. Those are in the application.
Yeah, I can quickly read through that. So outside of Morganti Wilson essentially honoring the existing footprint and foundation of the homes, this wasn't a tear down, so we are limited in honoring that foundation footprint. So outside of this inconvenience to the owner, the front door will not be accessible at the built height today without extending the steps past the 4 feet that we are allowed. So in order for the homeowner to access their home from a front stoop with the proper steps, and of course we need to account and allow for adequate spacing for the safety reasons, we need to allow the steps to be of accessible width and height. Steps will need to surpass the 4-foot setback by 2 feet 1 inches extending beyond that setback.
When did this issue come to the attention of either your team or teams or the property owner?
Elliot, do you want to elaborate on that when we kind of were injected into this?
Sure. Can we go back to actually I'd say maybe the rendered landscape plan? So when there was a permit revision that was submitted and approved for when we decided to get raise the first floor to get taller basement ceiling height, and in doing so, we didn't have Scott Byron's team on board at the time. We actually to get that permit revision approved, when you step out of the front door, we had all the steps going east to a bottom landing, and that created a very awkward entry sequence because when you approach towards the front door, you're met with this very tall wall and guardrail given the height. And so we designed it that way to get past the permit revision. And once we got Scott's team on board, we started exploring better entry sequences to approach the house that looks more inviting versus a wall with a guardrail. So this design allows for a entry sequence directly up to the front door without the need for any guardrails and easier access.
And then you enhance the landscaping in conjunction with the change in the stairway. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
So this is the rendering where I had my question, and it's a naive question, I believe, and that is there's a second set of steps that are closer to the street, which are the ones we're talking about, right? The ones we're talking about are the ones right up by the door. Are those permissible as of right? They essentially step up for, it looks like 4 steps to a patio, and then stepping stone. I saw them on a different rendering where they were actually physically going up.
And I apologize for that confusion. That's just in SketchUp. In order to insert this imagery, it just creates this illusion of an elevation. This is flat, so
I see.
The walk where Ashley is hovering at the moment is all one level here, and those are just stepping stones that just lead into the front yard, allowing access to the lawn. So there's
and to the patio, right? Because
so from the lawn, as Ashley's hovering that hand, 4 steps to the front walk. That's all ground level. There's no elevation change there.
I see. There was another photo where, or picture, not a photo, rendering where it appeared to be steps as well.
Yeah,
So
that does allow for misinterpretation.
what are we referring to this area that I refer to as a patio? This outside area that is obviously well beyond the allowable step area. What do you call that?
So that's the front walk. So from
Front
the
walk.
where we
I
have
see.
right. So from the driveway where that car is traced in, it's just a front walk to the front of the.
Uh-huh.
That's where the steps would go up, and you see that the dotted line is that setback. Now, if you were to make a right, you're just going to take 4 stepping stones that are ground level into the lawn, or you make a left and you step up, and then we're addressing the elevation concern.
I see. But those things that look like stairs there are actually at ground level. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. That was my question early on that derailed us. So
Okay, no problem.
I have a question. The progression of steps coming out of the front door, it looks like there's a landing, 2 steps, another landing, and then another 2 steps. I guess you could call it landing 3 steps, 1, 2, 3, or 2 down to a landing, and then another 2 steps to get down to the walk. Is there, I may need some help from Glenn here, or Ms. Lennox. Is there a code provision that doesn't allow steps to just come straight down there? Is a landing necessary, that first landing, or couldn't you just put steps going straight down?
There is
Straight down from the door, or
From the door.
Are you
Well,
referring
from
to
the
landing?
there's a landing. You have the landing, and then it goes down from there. But there's this. I don't know. I can't figure out the dimensioning there, but it looks like a few feet of a landing, and then another couple steps. Couldn't you just remove that landing altogether and have the steps come straight down? I guess I understand maybe there's an aesthetic reason, but is there a code reason, like from an accessibility, that you can't have a certain number of steps in a row? Couldn't you just compress that to have a landing up at the top and then just step down to your walk?
Code-wise, yes, that would start getting into requiring handrails, and the aesthetic would be to not use handrails at the front entry as part of the overall design aesthetic for the front of the building, and because visually it'll draw your eye more to the handrails, and by code allows you to have 30 inches of rise with no handrails.
Yep.
So by having that intermediate landing, it allows us 2 separate 30-inch rises without the need for those handrails.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood the necessity or the rationale behind this. It seems in the practical difficulty or hardship that this is a accessibility issue, that it cannot be done. To me, it seems like, and it's aesthetics. It's what you want it to look like. So I just wanted to make clear that it wasn't by necessity that it had to be this way. Otherwise, you couldn't use the front door. The front door is usable in many, in a few different configurations. They just may not look as nice as the other. Okay, that was it. I just wanted to confirm. Thank you for the clarification.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Dave, this is George. You're absolutely hitting the nail on the head. It's not a necessity. They could have built a code compliant platform out the door and gone down with the stairs or turned to the side, but it is an aesthetic issue. And for a house with this tall of a front wall, I agree this is the better way to go, but they unfortunately made some misstatements in their application, and I still think they're showing us. If you could, Elliot, could you, the profile view, the front elevation view, could you bring that up again, please? Because the elevation view.
So
No, not the existing, what's proposed, the architectural rendering with all the plants without the trees in front. Yeah, that one right there. Nope, get the tree. This is the one I don't, Elliot, that I don't understand, because the elevation view that you just had up shows the elevation of the planter boxes higher than the elevation of the finished floor. And yet you've got these planter boxes sketched in there with the elevations a couple of feet lower than the finished floor, but you clearly call them out as 659, both in the plans you submitted to the village and in your new architectural renderings. But your elevation view here has the planter boxes much lower. So what is the final plan? Are these planter boxes several feet, the ones that extend forward, are they several feet lower than the finished floor, or is this misdrawn?
So, Ashley, if you can actually go to the renderings that we sent you without the landscaping in it, this is the rendering from our renderer, from Morganti Wilson. This is what we've provided. This is the direction of these planter beds. So in plan view, the first two planters that you would approach would actually be at that intermediate landing level, which is what should be reflected on the plan as well. And then when you step up to the main landing right outside the door, that's where you'll get that third planter bed to the right as you step up.
Okay, well, both your planter on the left side as you approach, that little planter, and the forward planter, the first one you hit to on the right, you're calling those out right now at elevation 659 on your plan views, both what was submitted and what you just showed us. So they're labeled. If this is what you want, I just need to know what you're asking us to approve. And it looks like, is there going to be a roof over this whole front area now?
So the roof is all within, as of right, that's all behind the setback line. So that is not part of the variation because that's an as of right per.
Okay, but that's what's going. Yeah, but that's what's going. We want to see. You're asking for a variation, so we want to see how it works with how the house is being built. And before you showed us this, we didn't have advantage of this look.
Well, and I think part of the confusion too, this is not like an elevation view. This is a perspective view, like a 2-point perspective, which I think is what's causing confusion on how high things are. So,
those two forward planter boxes are definitely lower than the finished floor.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
I'm just trying to ask. Which one
you're
is
right.
correct? The plan
Yeah,
view
you're
or
right,
the
George.
elevation view?
Yep, I hear you.
Which one is it, Elliot? Which one do you want?
Give me a second. I need to pull up. I would have to ask John, Sarah, and Ashley. Can you pull up the plan that was submitted that has those elevations?
Marilyn, as Ashley pulls these up, since you're the subject matter expert, will you speak on this, please, Marilyn?
Marilyn or Ashley, before you comment, I'd like you to state your name for the record, and then I'd like to swear you in.
I'm Marilyn Moss, Scott Byron and Company.
Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, Marilyn?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, so George, if you're referring to this plan here with the elevation heights of the 658.9 on the planner on the left and the planner on the right being 659, that L-shaped one, those are not at the correct elevations on this plan. Those would be closer to that 656 elevation tag.
Okay, well, they're also wrong on your architectural plan view. Or your rendering plan view, because you call them out at 659 there also. Okay, so good to know. So we have that clear. The planter boxes are not at 659. They're down at 657 or something like that.
Correct.
Okay. And then what was really confusing in your elevation views is you have a completely new, separate decorative 2-foot wall that's going to run across the south side of the sidewalk. That's what really confused everybody, I think. But I'm assuming that does not need a variation because it's detached from the house and would be considered, could be considered a small fence, which would comply with code. Is that correct, Glenn? Is that although you're probably seeing this for the first time also?
I can answer that, George. That's exactly right. It would be considered a fence. It's a small decorative wall, roughly 24 inches high. And it's just meant to give a little separation between the street and this walkway in the front entrance to make it feel a little bit more formal and closed off, and then surrounded by boxwood on both sides. And no, I don't feel like we would need a variance, and so we would submit that when it's time for the permit rather than for this variance review. It is why it wasn't on here.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Question. It seems that, I understand with the description about the basement and going deeper that the ceiling height, which caused the issue with the stair, but did you try within the variance? First of all, it would have been nice to have a red line or for us to have a visual to understand sort of where the cut mark was with all your red lines that are clearly indicated on the plan. But did you try to modify this? And I know you're gonna come back and say, well, it's aesthetically pleasing and it's very lovely, but did you try to work within the variance and go through the various steps of hardship? Does that make sense?
Does. Marilyn, will you speak on our attempts here on satisfying this need?
I think that it's much like what Elliot has already talked about, in an effort to not have a handrail and distract from the front of the house by dividing up the steps in this way to make it a little bit more graceful entrance, and also to avoid having a large set of stairs that lead into the house and maybe imposing. And then coming off to the side is really just a way to have just a little bit of a fun entrance that speaks to the client and their needs. And when you look at the landscape plan, we're using that entrance to go out into a lawn panel. So yes, we have explored, like Elliot said earlier, of having the stairs go straight to the east towards the lake, and we wouldn't need a variance. But what that means, based on where the driveway is, you would have to walk past the front door and then swing back around in this instance. There was no, it seems like just a front entrance that's inviting from the street and from the driveway is the more appropriate.
And in doing that, as you walk past the front entry, you're met with this 4-foot wall to be able to retain that landing. On top of that 4-foot wall would also be a 36-inch guardrail, given the height difference between the main grade and the front landing. So I would like to also mention, Ashley, can you draw a line across going east-west from the screen porch all the way across where the start of that 6'1" dimension is? Yes, from there all the way over to the right. So everything above that line is as of right within our building setback. The only thing we're asking for a variation for would be everything to the south of that line, because that's the only thing that's extending into the front yard setback. Because of the location of the existing building, and with the taller first floor height, that's what's creating the hardship. Is like we didn't choose the location of the building. We were working with an existing footprint and the existing foundation. So just to make it clear, that line in blue is the actual setback line. And so we're not asking for a variation for everything above that line, it's everything to the south of that line.
What are the dimensions of that area, Elliot?
Of which area? To the south?
Right, the affected area, the variance area.
So it extends 6'1" from that line, and the total width, you can see at the bottom of the screen, is 20 foot 8.5 from left to right to the planter, and then the second half, which steps back a little bit further, is another 19 foot 2.5. I believe what the code allows is a maximum right now of extending 4 feet with a 5.5 foot width. So we're looking for a variance to go beyond that for this configuration.
And do you contemplate any impact on impermeable surface area or on drainage or anything like that?
No, because of how large the lot size is and how small our buildable area is given the ravine setback on the property, we are well underneath the impervious surface calculations for the property itself.
I would agree with that. I did the calculations, and we're well below.
Okay.
Specifically, I would add, I'm pulling this sheet up here. So just in general, there's a very large portion of just for practical reasons, non-buildable area on this lot. And then in addition, a curious way the village's code works in this case is that the amount of impervious permissible on a lot varies with width, and this happens to be an exceptionally wide lot compared to its depth. I don't have the permissible amount handy, but I can tell you that overall on their civil plans, and I'm not sure to what extent this patio is reflected in here, but less than 15% of the site is impervious, as you can tell from, I think, just visually. So just wanted to note that.
Has the village...
I'd like to make a comment. This is the other Elliot.
Yeah, certainly, Elliot.
Up every time I hear Elliot. And we do spell it the same way. And I see the view looking to the east, the rendered view looking east. Yeah, that. So we're talking about, I get a better perspective this way. We're talking about the planters beyond the the planter to the east is beyond the 4 feet. Is the planter to the west beyond the 4 feet?
The lower one, 2/3 of it would be, yes. The upper portion of the L leg going back towards the house, part of that, I believe, extends into the what's allowable within our setback.
Now, your other drawings show that there's actually a pathway going from before you get to the 3 steps toward the garage. Is that correct?
From the driveway to the front steps, that would be in the landscape rendered plan, correct?
Okay, and that's within code?
As far as I know, yes, because that's at grade. It's not raised. It's not a raised walkway.
Okay. So a couple of things come to mind after this discussion. One, there's no uniqueness about this request. It is special privilege because it doesn't have to be done. So for that reason, I would say it's probably not necessary to give you a variance. That said, I'm not even sure why they have steps going to the front because there's no sidewalk. They're never going to go out those stairs and down onto their grass, except as they're going to mow it. And my guess is they're going to have a landscape service. So it's purely aesthetics. They're always going to come out the front door and go toward the garage pathway. There's no reason to go out on the grass.
Well, that's not necessarily true, Elliot, because the client has a young family and there is no livable space. They live on a ravine. So the front yard in essence becomes the backyard. So they will need access to kick a ball around with the kids.
Well, that's true. That's true, but they can come down the pathway to the garage area, which will probably open up and pull out all the toys that the kids want to play with. So I'm just saying, there's no uniqueness or need that has to be done. You're really requesting a special privilege. That's not to say I wouldn't vote for it, but let's just call it the way it is. You don't meet the first two conditions as far as I'm concerned.
So Elliot, in full transparency and honoring our brand and the Scott Byron way, that the takeaway is correct. I'm not going to present a case and be fastidious or litigious. That's not what we are seeking.
But you put that into your request for a variance.
So we
initially,
did.
Whoever filled this out, they said they wanted to do that.
So, and I recognize that. So today, what I would like to say is that, yes, we are seeking a variance because today the lot looks different. The doors are a lot higher. The elevation is a lot higher than where we originally projected, Elliot had projected. So it becomes, do we want this monumental staircase with less safety regulated conditions, incorporate a railing into it? The variance, the language quickly becomes, we are going to exceed the 2-foot setback and allow a proper footing for the client with the 2 steps. So I could present and argue a case. I don't think that just really behooves anyone at the moment. I'm going to campaign for our client at 700 Mountain Road, and we have a quest and a shared vision with Elliot from Morganti. So of course we want to achieve that goal for the client, and then putting this in front of the board tonight is hopefully we presented a highlight reel as to how it could be considered a variance, but I'm not going to sit here and insult anyone's intelligence. There is another method. I don't know if it adheres to the overall Lake Bluff tradition and aesthetic. I'll leave that up to the committee this evening, but that's the case we're going to present. The language to get in front of you is a hardship. We are seeking that variance because of what we have inherited. Elliot had to adhere to the existing conditions and footprint and foundation. We are trying to get the client down from an elevated stand down to a safe ground level for the kids, eliminating that monumental staircase and railing. So,
Elliot, okay, I'm just quoting what's in your variations, and I'm not sure whoever filled this out did it properly. I think that's part, and plus we didn't have the exact renderings, which is making us all a little bit more confused going into this project right now.
And I apologize for that.
Elliot, I'd like to take a moment and make a quick response. Ashley, if you can go back to the rendered plan for a moment, please. And if you can circle or highlight in some way the walkway from the drive and the steps going out to, or not the steps, but the stepping stones going to the yard. So this element, the way I understand your concern or your comments, Elliot, is that kind of we're leaning towards responding to this element here and the stepping stones going out to the yard. But that, to my knowledge, is all as of right because it's at grade. The only thing we're asking for a variance would be the actual steps that are above that.
I understand that, but I'm just saying that's for some reason 2 feet is creating a lot of conversation here, right? It's really 2.5 feet that we're really talking about.
Yes.
It's a lot of conversation. And I think part of it's because this wasn't clear to begin with.
I apologize.
Maybe in the future, it could have been handled a lot differently if we came out and said, I need 2.5 feet. I have an aesthetic view that's important to the family, and so forth. Again, it's 2.5 feet. It's not encroaching on anybody. There's nobody in front of them, and it's no sidewalks. So it's not a big. Theoretically, it shouldn't be a big deal. It's become a big deal.
I apologize for the confusion. If we're ever in front of this committee, which I know we will be in the near future, we will prepare differently. I apologize for all the confusion.
I'm sentenced.
Ms. Danley? Any further
No,
comments?
I don't have any other further comments. I think just redlining, what they're seeking and really highlighting that again, the dimension would be so helpful. Clearly, they've done a lot of work in trying to beautify the landscape and working with the conditions of a new build. But for us and to see this at the steps moving forward, to clarify that for us would be most helpful in the future.
Thank you. I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, it's very atypical to get a petition for a variation during the course of construction. I don't think it's come up very often over the years. A question for Mr. Cole is whether or not village staff has had an adequate opportunity to review this petition.
Certainly. So I would say I'd respond in a few ways. So the drawing you're seeing here does include additional landscape details. I mean, as was said previously, nothing here. Certainly, they may change the aesthetics or how you might view or react to the variation, but there's nothing here that really, in our view, implicates code or regulatory issues, right? There's a path at grade, there's treads at grade, that short fence, again, that's all permissible by code. So we've had that original plan set that shows that 4-foot dimension, the 6'1" dimension, et cetera, which matches the pre-version here for a while. The members of our team have taken a look at it and didn't have any particular comments on this. Thinking through some of the other comments raised by the commissioners, I mean, there are no precedents in zoning. Certainly I can think of applications that have come before the commission that have been received both favorably and unfavorably similar to this. Again, I'm happy to, if there's specific questions or specific thoughts, happy to go into that. I guess the last thing I would say is, this is, in some ways it is, typically you don't see variation requests submitted under construction. I mean, here I guess until the point was raised, it hadn't really occurred to us, or to me at least. It is in some ways, it's interesting how the work has been broken out, but in some ways this is sort of a different project with a different contractor. I mean, it's certainly part of the bigger project and they're cooperating with the architect here. But we had, I think you could have, but for the floor elevation, I think this could very well have just been an improvement project standing on its own. So that would be my reaction to what we've heard so far.
No, thank you, Mr. Cole.
Chair Peters, are there any members of the public to comment on this issue?
We have none that have identified themselves. Certainly, again, if anyone would like to, there's a raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. There's a Q&A feature also at the bottom of your screen. Have not seen anyone yet, and do not yet at this time.
And no other comment received by the village.
We received, I'll check the inbox one more time to be sure, but when I last looked, there was no comments received by the village.
Any further questions or comments from the commissioners?
I'd just like to wrap up by saying that in spite of my major heartburn with the, I would call it terrible submittal just because of all the conflicting information, and I hope that staff will make them, for the record, because we're the ones approving this, if we approve it, that they make them turn in corrected plan views with the right elevations on it. I think in spite of all that, I do think this is an extremely unique lot. this lot, they're forced to put any type of structure in the far southeast corner, as they've indicated. So the front wall of the house is going to be all over the front property line. The other side of the street is an R4 district that only has a 20-foot setback. They have no neighbor to the west. The neighbor to the east sits on a property where the house is set well back, practically a flag lot. So just an extremely unique situation. So I'd like to make a motion that we approve the requested variation, provided that staff require the architect to clean up, or the landscaper to clean up all the errors, inconsistent drawings, so that we know, but it's for the record, can understand what was actually approved.
Urge, I assure everyone that this will be cleaned up as soon as daylight tomorrow. We will activate every teammate we have to get this adjusted thoroughly. And I apologize for the confusion again.
Oh, thank you.
If I might, this is Susan Ryder. If I might, I wanted to go to the standards for variation. That's what we're discussing, right? The 4 standards for variation, which appears on page 3 of 4 or page 10 of 162 of our packet that's online. And just test ourselves, because while all of what George just said is true, it you know, the setback on the other side of the street being much smaller, and those considerations and the uniqueness of the lot, the hardship or difficulty doesn't, that not merely special privilege section doesn't seem to have been met. And I'm trying not to get hung up on things I don't need to get hung up on, but can you tell me how we interpret that such that these 4 standards, because each of the standards need to be met, right? How might we see this project as having met all 4 standards, I guess is my question.
Is that a question for the applicant or the commission or for staff?
Staff or the attorney? I'm just somewhat uncomfortable voting a variation. Although, you know, looking at this from 30,000 feet, it seems like something that ought to be doable, but I don't know. Is this something that we are allowed to interpret more broadly than I'm reading it just now? The special privilege language?
Yeah, so...
Or do you kind of balance all 4 against one another? Go ahead.
So if I may, so you have the code requirements, and what the code does not, you know, and you're supposed to meet all 4 of the requirements. Now, what it does not say is how much weight that you have to give each one of these. You know, in some situations, you know, some factors are going to weigh much heavier than others, and you're looking at each application on its own.
I see.
And ultimately, the burden is on the applicant to meet the 4 factors. And, you know, so, you know, looking at unique physical condition, you know, there are some situations where it's a really odd lot. And that physical condition, it plays a huge role in the variation. Sometimes, you know, maybe the lot's not so, you know, extraordinary, but there's a unique physical condition that exists because of something that's a pre-existing structure or something that's there.
Yes.
That, you know, so so there's different ways to evaluate it, you know, and then you sit there and say, let's balance that against, you know, not merely a special privilege. It's not a pure one-to-one balancing test. You know,
I see. Okay.
Privilege in some situations may apply more than others. You know, so I think you're supposed to meet all 4. It's up to you to interpret based on the evidence that you're presented. Do you think that they've met all 4? And, you know, it's kind of up to you to evaluate which ones in your mind I think are the most important based on the unique circumstances of this case.
I see. Thank you. That's very helpful.
If I may, Member Ryder.
And, yeah, I have one more comment. Normally, after we have a motion, there's time for discussion. Is this that time, or do we need a second first before that?
No, that's fine, David, if you want to discuss it before there's a second, assuming there is a second.
Okay, well, yeah, I'd like to discuss it, and that I just want to make sure my impression of this is clear. I kind of was in Susan's point of view as well, and that to me these are clear. The standards are not clear or are not met in many respects. These are discretionary aesthetic choices, and this house was almost down to studs. A significant portion of the house was removed and then rebuilt. And so when you think about like hardship due to existing configuration, this was almost a tear down. So much of it was removed. And there are options to get around this, and I get that there may be an aesthetic option that's better, but even then, it's a pretty wide version of this. There's lots of different really niceties to it. I have lots of nice aesthetic things that I would like to do to my house. I built it 13 years ago, and I wanted to put on dormers to reduce the scale of the house on the roof over our garage. But I was told I couldn't because someone could potentially use that garage as living space. And so now I've got a really big, ugly side of a roof that everybody has to stare at, which has a ton of scale, where aesthetically I wanted to put dormers on. I couldn't do it. And then separately, the connection between the garage and my house on the second floor, I had to reduce the headway to about 5 feet 5 inches. And I can't tell you how many times I've banged my head on the header to bring all of my winter storage and summer storage stuff in and out of that house. When aesthetically and safety-wise, it would have been better to have that ridge just 1 foot higher. And so I think we're going down a very slippery slope to start allowing these variances to go through for nothing more than aesthetics. And frankly speaking, this is nothing more than aesthetics, in my opinion and my judgment of how the standards were addressed. No matter what it says in there, because it doesn't say that in there, it says that this is accessibility. And it's not accessibility, it's aesthetics. So I am not in favor of this, but, just want to let my voice be heard.
So David, if you wouldn't mind just one moment on that, I would like to challenge a couple of those points. The home was removed essentially, and they were down to the studs. That does not change the footprint that Morganti Wilson has honored in the foundation line. That has not changed. We honored that. We honored the structure, we honored the home, and what we're trying to do is honor the whole neighborhood and frankly the visual aesthetic of Lake Bluff and what is Lake Bluff. So as much as one can present a case to counter mine as far as the aesthetic, yes, the aesthetic has been addressed because ultimately it has to be pleasing to this committee, to the client, to the neighborhood. However, there is an issue with the way the home is inherited at this moment. For us to address this for the client at 700 Mountain is I need to get them safely from this elevated front door safely down to the ground while we are exceeding a 2-foot setback. So you keep mentioning the aesthetic. That is not what is leading this project. What is leading the project is the safety for the Sandersons and their children to get down from the home, not have this monumental structure with this cumbersome railing when the ask is a 2-step post the setback. So as much as you can present a case that this is an aesthetic, this is aesthetically pleasing, we are hopeful that it's aesthetically pleasing. However, we are addressing the client's concerns. We did inherit this project at a certain point in the construction. Also, just because the home was torn down to 2x4s, the footprint has not changed. I can quickly argue that this lot is one of the more unique that we have worked on collectively in 40 years because the home is on a ravine. You walk, the stepping stones in the backyard are on a ravine. We are trying to please the client. We want to please the members of the board. We want to please Lake Bluff. So I just would like everyone to consider this with fresh eyes, and it should not become a because I didn't do that or because I didn't get this. Today, all I could present to you is a fair and transparent argument, and I'm going to leave it to the members to decipher if we are causing a precedent. That would become more my concern. If this has never been awarded, then tell me that, and I'm okay. I'm okay. We'll go back to the drawing board. But if this is not a precedent, then I would like that to properly be considered.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could.
Sure.
I've just mentioned for maybe for the good of the discussion that you do have a motion on the floor that needs to be seconded. On this particular instance, the PCZBA has final authority to grant or deny this, so it doesn't go to the board or anything like that. There's that draft approval order in your packet. You will need 4 affirmative votes to grant this, even though there are only currently 6 members sitting on the board. So, just a note.
No, thank you very much. Any further discussion among the commissioners?
I have an additional question.
Certainly.
If we were not to grant this variance, what options would the homeowner have? I guess putting the steps going to the south, and as was drawn up in the most recent permitting request that I heard someone reference, the way it was drawn up in order for them to move forward the first time was that the stairs go to the south and then go back around, that you would curve back around and go to the driveway. So is that the only alternative? Is there another regulatory alternative? To David's point, it's hard to read the standards and squeeze this variance into those standards. I now understand from the attorney how we might do that, but it doesn't strike me as all that straightforward to do to grant it under the variance. So can you explain to me if there's other alternatives for this to be resolved?
To whom is that question directed?
I don't know, to the attorney again, because I like asking Ben questions, I guess.
So, from a physical layout standpoint, one idea you've heard is the railing.
Yes.
And then, not extending, not being, an architect, I don't want to venture to say all the various options and what.
Right.
The other option that you have is, if you'd like to see some alternatives, is you can request, a continuance and ask the applicant to come back with various options, and provide you additional information on possibilities. If, unless they have some thoughts this evening that they can provide, but that's another prerogative of this body, if you so desire to see more and different ideas.
So, Mr. Schuster, I'd like to just quickly address that. The option, we can go back to the drawing board and create a litany of options. That's a non-issue. What I ask is that if this is cause for precedent, that be weighed properly. If it is not, I just ask that we move to a vote, because running through 100 scenarios and confusing the board further, I don't think does anyone a courtesy. The ask is that we exceed 2 feet beyond the setback to adhere to an overall client's vision. It's a unified front with Morganti Wilson in this pursuit. So I ask that we go to voting, and then if from that point, the redraws, I don't necessarily think would even require a variance and to occupy any of the board's time further. I'll leave it to your recommendation, because I don't want to sound confrontational, but the redraws are quick, and the redraws, frankly, we wouldn't even need a variance review. However, I would like everyone to consider the uniqueness of the property and all the scenarios we've run through, and we're just trying to satisfy a client's request and also adhere to the Lake Bluff image. I feel that is the aesthetic component to all this, and that if it's not a cause for precedent, that it would be further considered from the board.
I have another comment just to add to everybody's speech. David, I had the exact opposite problem. I had the same problem with the opposite result from this particular board when I did my additions. And my house stuck out a little bit too far and too high. It was the aesthetics that made my wife and I want this project done. And fortunately, the board was listening and in favor of it. Otherwise, the house would not look nearly as not pleasant as it does now. There's no hardship. But as a group, we have to look at the whole project. It just can't be, yeah, it's a letter of the law. Fortunately, we're allowed to make decisions based on what's right. Not to say that what they did to you with your dormers and stuff was probably wrong, especially the 5-foot ceiling and somebody your height. I truly feel a 2-foot extension of a staircase is really a minimal burden to this village. And for these people to go back to the drawing board and spend the money, more money, so that's their responsibility. I kind of find that we're spending a lot of time on a minor issue. If this is going to be an exception, it'll be one exception. We won't be opening up the door for future for this to happen again. We take each case individually and come up with a solution that's proper for the homeowner and for the village. I'm going to second the motion at this point. I think we spent a lot of time on this and we've got more to do.
And Elliot, this is George. I agree with you 100%. And particularly, I think the overwhelming factor here is the very unique configuration of this lot, and the fact that any house is going to be squeezed up into that corner. And we're talking about planters now that are only sticking out of the ground 2.5 feet, and one raised platform that is probably 2 feet above grade. I would urge the members to vote in favor of this.
So just to clarify what the motion is on the floor, if my understanding is correct, it's moving to approve this, and I believe it's subject to the cleanups to the plans that have been identified. Is that correct?
That was my motion, yes, just to clean up the errors.
Yep.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, could we get a vote, please?
Certainly. Again, as always, the order is random. Member Miller.
Aye.
Member Russell.
Aye.
Member Danley.
Aye.
Member Ryder.
Aye.
Member Burns.
Nay.
Chair Peters.
Aye.
The motion carries.
Thank you for the consideration. Thank you for your time, and I apologize for the confusion and delayed activity on this forum. We will immediately activate a team to clean this up and properly present this. I am very appreciative for the consideration.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, agenda item number.
Can I make a comment? I have one more comment for the future.
Certainly.
Glenn.
Yes, Member Miller.
Can we not wait to the last minute if the renderings look pretty crummy to begin with? And somebody at the village say it's not acceptable to present to the board? I mean, what we got in our packet was really, I couldn't even understand the drawings.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it looked like my grandkids were just scribbling on a piece of paper. And then to come in today with these drawings, which we had no time to look at, I think would have served us better, and we would have gotten to it quicker if we postponed this another month. And it's certainly, in their scheme of things, this house has taken forever to build anyway. They weren't in that big of a rush. In the future, can we just have more upfront than what we had this time?
Yeah, certainly. I personally will take responsibility for that. You know, it's always a bit of a discretionary call how much material you ask for from applicants, especially something like this where you have a lot of patios and planters and things that, you know, aren't necessarily structures. It's a hard call if you want to ask an applicant to put in the cost for parent elevations. In this case, we didn't, and if I could do it again, we would have asked for that earlier, and we would have brought you, worked with the applicants to bring you a better presentation. So I apologize for that.
Yeah, thank you, Member Miller and Mr. Cole. Agenda item number 5, public hearing, subdivision and variations for 500 Arden Shore Road. Mr. Cole, if you could give us an overview, please.
Certainly. So this was a subject of a workshop back in November. Actually, part of your minutes in this packet was an informal workshop before submittal with the applicant and their team. In the interest of time tonight, ordinarily I would tee up some of the zoning issues, and then we would do an applicant presentation with that for context. As always, I hope that's usually a good format. In this case, really the zoning issues are probably the bulk of our discussion tonight. I've spoken with Mr. Adelman and the team, and we were thinking it would be best if Nick Patera, the planner for the applicant, would give a brief summary. Well, the team really could give a brief summary of the proposal, and then we'll go through some of the procedural and the technical issues that are at play here afterwards.
Yeah, if the team could identify who is going to be presenting tonight or who's going to be commenting, and then we'll swear you in, please.
Sure. You've got Mike Edelman here. I'm the attorney for the applicant. Lean Crable is the managing member of the applicant. Nick Patera from Tesca Associates is our land use planner. And we have standing by just in case Phil Liederbach, who's the architect for Mr. Crable as well.
Gentlemen, do you all? Oh, go ahead, Mr. Edelman.
I think I would suggest that you might want to put everybody in at once.
Yes. Yeah, my goal is to swear in Mr. Edelman, Mr. Knievel, Mr. Patera, and Phil also. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, gentlemen?
I do.
I do.
Thank you. The petitioner, please proceed.
I'll kick it off real quick, and then I'll hand it over to Nick. We were last before you for a workshop in November. Nothing has really changed from our perspective. We're requesting 5 variations. A variation for access because our easterly lot number 1 has no frontage on a public thoroughfare. Variation or variance for well water because there's no public water service available. A third variation is for septic because there's no sanitary within 1,000 feet. Fourth variation is for to permit a 10-foot high fence instead of your statutory 6-foot high fence only along the boundary between lot 1 and lot 2 to provide additional screening for the residents from the golf driving range. And the 5th but most significant variation we're requesting is for 2 modest ADUs, accessory dwelling units. We are approaching this on a variation basis. I did do a separate analysis of your special use criteria as well as the text amendment. I don't know if we need to get into that this evening or not. Hopefully the variations work for us. And since our workshop in November, 2 significant events have happened. December 4th, we acquired the property. We took title to it. And also in December, I think it was December 10th, we entered into a contract with Shore Acres to acquire lot 2, subject to us, of course, getting approval for our subdivision. that's pretty much it in a thumbnail. I'll turn it over to Nick Patera to do the visual presentation because he put together some lovely graphics.
Thank you, Mr. Edelman.
Thanks, Mike. Liam, I don't know if you wanted to have a few words as the managing owner, but I'd stand by if that's the case. Otherwise, I can go ahead.
Nick, and hi, everybody. I think in the interest of time, but also because, I had the opportunity to speak with you late last year, I'll just hand it off to Nick, but appreciate your consideration.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liam. Glenn, is there a chance that you could put up graphics, or am I sharing a screen, or what's your situation there?
Yep. Unfortunately, I'm having just a little bit of technical difficulty, but we can still do that for you.
Make me feel right at home. Thank you. I can carry on. In your commissioner's packets, I have the same content for the presentation. Thank you. And I'm going to ask Glenn, if you're the narrator of this, we're right at the tail end of, so I think we need to come back up about to the very top end of it.
Yeah, again, a little bit of technical difficulties, Nick. I apologize.
Okay. I'll sit tight.
All right, go on ahead.
Okay. Thank you. What you're looking at here is the entire 26-acre property. What you may know, may not know, the very little stem that's going out to Sheridan Road is our only frontage, and this is a point of one of the variances. That little skinny L-shaped stem contains Arden Shore Road. It's about 20 feet wide. When it gets to the elbow of the stem, there's a South Arden Shore Road that goes back to the Kellers residence, and that there's a elbow North Arden Shore Road that comes into our property and also serves Mr. and Mrs. Booth's property. Arden Shore would remain, but the main purpose of showing this is the frontage on Sheridan Road and the Arden Shore south that goes to Kellers would remain. It would remain serving the Booth property, and the old Arden Shore access would stay from a maintenance point of view. I'll show you that in one of the later slides, how we are going to use at least the corridor. Glenn, can you push through the next one or two? You all may know the Arden Shore facility had about 13 buildings on the property. They've all since been removed, but it has a long historic legacy to it. But that would explain anybody who would want to go out to the property, maybe you all have, what this property was leveled and contained, and a lot of the flat frontage and the voids in trees once contained several buildings. Many of these have long since gone. Next slide would show you the last version of the buildings that were there. These were, believe it or not, SOM architecture. And when a previous buyer bought the property, those buildings were all removed. That little thumbnail survey on the lower right shows where the buildings and the roads and the improvements were. The only thing that's really remaining is the roadbed and then one well house that's about right in the middle of the property. Go ahead, Glenn. We can come back if you have questions on these. Thank you. The survey of the property has been completed, and just showing you progress, continue on. The survey also has been supplemented with a subdivision plat, and this is somewhat worth looking at, but lot 1 is our eastern lot that would contain the residences, and lot 2 would be the portion that would support and been purchased by Shore Acres. So you can see the split line between 1 and 2. There's a panhandle piece at the top of this image that allows lot 1 to access a easement that goes up to Shore Acres Road. And so Lot 1 will no longer be using as its primary access the old Arden Shore Road, and it would be using an access by permission with easement up to Shore Acres to the north. So that's what this narrow, relatively narrow, that we're seeking a variation for. Otherwise, the Lot 1 is 400 feet wide of lake frontage. So it's really just for the access to get up to Shore Acres for public safety and access provisions. If you go ahead, it starts to get a little bit more interesting as we get into the site plans. The purple is a primary wetland. There's two other smaller wetlands that are in Lot 1, but this has all been flagged and delineated. We also have supplemented this survey with existing trees. Each one of the trees have been identified by species, size, form, condition. It's a multiple page document that we'll be using as we go forward, pending subdivision approval, but prior to getting final permit with the tree inventory and further definition of tree preservation to support the uses that we're looking at. If you continue on, thanks, Glenn. The existing contiguity with Shore Acres is evident here. You can see how the narrow practice range of Shore Acres is right in the middle of the screen that will be supplemented with this new practice range. Our neighbors to the north, Covington's, and to the south, Kellers and Booth's, were present in the previous conversation. We don't know that we've heard anything further from them other than they seem to be supportive of what we're proposing. Into the site plan is next. I'm moving through these quicker. We can come back to any one of these. Thank you. I think we're keep going. This was nothing more than a GPS location, and then just showing you progress on how the trees are populated. A lot of them are in the wetlands where there were buildings on Arden Shore. You're seeing openings and voids through here. I really wouldn't use this as much as I would use that more technical survey. So we did do our tree inventory in the early part of December of 2020. Please go ahead, Glenn. Thank you. This, we have the idea. If you go to the next one, it's a little bit bigger view, same. What you're now seeing is the Lot 1 east, Lot 2 west is the practice range. The homes that we're proposing on Lot 1 would be a primary residence and supplemental 2 additional residences. One's up at the top northeast corner and one is at the southeast corner, but these are really just placeholders until we really start to program the site plan and the architecture. So it's really for reference purposes at this point, but you can see the great openness of the property, which is really the point of why I get enthusiastic over this application, is that we really have an extraordinary opportunity here to accommodate a lakefront residence and a adjunct to the dignity of Shore Acres to improve the golf playability. The driveways you can see coming in to Lot 1 are attached to Shore Acres Road. You can see the yellow hatch area that's allowing us to convey the drive that we have coming into the property across Shore Acres property into that panhandle piece, and then it will loop into our property. There was a comment in our last meeting from the Covingtons, and we wanted to make sure we avoided a small corner of the Covington property, which we've made an adjustment. The whole reason for the alignment of the Lot 1 driveway, and then you'll see another, in essence, a cart path that's coming into Lot 2 to get to the practice range, we've chosen locations across that purple wetland that you saw earlier, where the wetland is narrow. We are allowed to have, by permit, a crossing of the wetland, and we haven't exceeded the, call it the disturbance to the wetland. So we're confident with permit that we'll be able to make both the driveway and the access to the practice range function by both coming off of Short Acres Road at the top of the site plan. The former Arden Shore Road corridor is shown with a red dashed line through the bottom of the lot 2. That's really just for occasional access for maintenance. If there's a delivery or a drop off, or somebody has to do a tree trimming, they can get into lot 2 or even into lot 1 for the construction access for the homes on lot 1 without having to drive through Shore Acres Road until the home is done. Then it would just be used for rare occasional access, but it's high and dry. It's a former roadbed, and we wanted to at least keep the provision to be able to use that for accessibility to the property. The next slide is the same image, just enlarged, but if you should have questions, it's showing that the practice range is a championship range, a 300-yard range. We've shown how it stays out of the wetland. The blue line is the primary wetland line. The red line is a wetland buffer line that you have a lesser amount of disturbance that you do, and we can easily accommodate the practice range. It could all be driving from east to west, so we're not driving balls toward the future homes of lot 1. And that there would be still, again, the same way that we're talking about the homes on lot 1, the practice range configuration, and whether or not there's other elements of the refinements of keys and location of some of the facility. There may be a pavilion or a maintenance garage that would be shown at the point of getting permit for the golf range, but otherwise it's pretty low key and very much in keeping with the dignity of Shore Acres itself. And I believe I'm coming to the last 2 slides, Glenn. The lot 1, 7.85 acres, 400 feet of a little bit over 400 feet of frontage on the lake, with the ability to support 1 primary and 2 accessory dwellings on the property, and keeping a great abundance of open space on the property. The driveway you can clearly see now coming into the property, and then the setbacks from the north, Covington's, and from the south, Keller's, are commitments that we're making to side yard setbacks for the primary buildings. Those are 40-foot setbacks, the yellow lines, on all sides, and then we would have to abide by the rear yard along Lake Michigan setback for where the primary home is. As you may know, the bluff itself has already been reconfigured. That kind of shadow V shape is actually a foot trail that was graded at the time that the slope was graded and engineered back. There's a stone revetment down at the lakefront, so it is very stable and already ready for anybody to come site the home on the property. We don't have a steep slope and a cascading hillside here. We have a very stable vegetated hillside that we're looking at. I conclude with this, back to Mike. The last picture was a little bit of an inspiration, but standing up at this top north edge, we were really looking to try and get this view. This was I think a November day, And, you know, I'm seeing all the way down to the south end of the lake as anybody, you know, your beautiful lakefront and Lake Bluff, your pulse rate drops about, you know, 10 points, or better when you get this panoramic view. So, that may explain a little bit of the enthusiasm that we have over this property as well as the new owners would have. Mike, I return it to you. Thank you. And maybe we go back to the site plan if you would. Thank you very much, Glenn.
Liam, I apologize for passing over you before. Did you want to make a couple comments about what your vision is for this? And then we'll ask Glenn to do a staff report.
Sure. Just again, you know, quickly recap of what I shared late last year is we've, you know, our family lives in Chicago, and we were excited about this property and the possibility of creating a place for us to go on the weekends and vacations, the holidays, and I think we really were attracted to Lake Bluff and this property. We love the feel of Lake Bluff. We love the feel of this property. We love the feel of the CE district within Lake Bluff, kind of the traditional country estates and the beautiful homes, you know, that are there by architects like David Adler. And I think what we wanted to do is create something that kind of is in the spirit of the architecture and the history of you know, this part of Lake Bluff, and build a home that is, you know, I would say, you know, relatively modest in size, but, you know, great for our family. And my wife and I both have parents who are getting up there in age, and so I think that's where the idea of having the accessory dwelling units came in, that have the ability to host our relatives when they're here and give them some space. But also just be very, very clear is that we'd have no interest in using these accessory dwelling units for anything other than for hosting family. So that's probably all I need to say.
Great. Glenn, I'm going to give it to you because you wrote that excellent staff report and seem to have the code provisions down pretty pat.
Certainly. So, for the benefit of the commission, just a high-level overview of what we're talking about procedurally. The first is we're talking about approval of a tentative and final plat. So, set aside everything else. Someone wants to subdivide land in the village. They have to come, they have to bring the plat to you. Typically, that would be because there are things in there like new public streets or private streets or infrastructure. Nothing like that in this particular plat. Generally speaking, if someone brings to you a plat that conforms with zoning, the expectation is that you would accept the plat. There's no standards to meet except that it complies with the code. Well, there are standards as far as things they need to show on their submittals, and again, if there was infrastructure, that would be a whole different conversation, but it's not a very subjective process. In this case, I guess high level, I would say that for a while now, the village has not had a major subdivision. I believe I'm right in saying the last really big one was Lansdowne. Maybe that was, what, 2007, 2008 or so, and really was only just, you've only just seen houses finished being built there and on Clay Court as well relatively recently. And so there just hasn't been great examples of parcels this large. I would say, and something we can discuss more later, is that there's certainly opportunities for some of what we have in place to be improved and modernized, same as other places in the code. And so there are a few requirements of our subdivision ordinance that if we couldn't proceed in the way we're suggesting, you may still want to waive anyway. For example, one is that typically an applicant would be required to show you that they've been approved to be able to use septic tanks if they needed septic tanks. And you'll see the applicant has provided some of that correspondence with their application, but the health department doesn't give the same approvals as they did once upon a time. So even though you can see that correspondence and you can view an engineer's opinion about the ability to use septic tanks in the applicant's materials. Strictly speaking, if you were being very strict, you couldn't say someone satisfied that particular provision of the subdivision ordinance. Now, ordinarily, you have a way to waive those things. In this case, the village code gives you a very broad authority to waive those where part of the subdivision lies outside the village. So in this particular case, not by design, not to be evasive, but just it simplifies the process. Part of that very narrow 20-foot strip that goes to Sheridan Road lies outside of the corporate limits of the village. And so that gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of recommending that the village board waive any contrary subdivision requirements, really. And again, here with no public-private infrastructure, not where we would be using most of the subdivision ordinance to do our review. With that said, we do have some what I would describe issues with the zoning lots, right? It really issues with the configuration of land, and then issues with the improvements that are proposed on that land. And we've taken those together, even though some of the final details haven't been ironed out. So the first 2 of 4 variations are the arrangement of land, right? The first is the village code. The zoning regulations require that if you make a lot, it fronts on a public street. In this case, lot 2 technically can be said to. Again, you have that 20-foot strip that takes you out to Sheridan Road. Lot 1, you can't say that. This here, Shore Acres Drive, is not, even if it was directly fronting on that street, it's not a public street. So you would need to provide a variation to authorize that lot to be made. The second is that both lots are, even though they're quite generous in size, they're deficient as to width of the setback. So lot 2, the front side is Sheridan Road, and so it's only 20 feet for a very long segment of the lot. Lot 1, the front is as you go towards Shore Acres Drive, and again, you're in the pole part of that flag lot, so you're deficient as to width. So even before you get into what's built here, you would need to evaluate the variation standards and grant a variation just to allow this subdivision to happen. After that, you have what you're building there. The first of those 2 issues is really the only new issue from the November workshop, which is this idea of a 10-foot tall fence just generally along the line here between lot 1 and lot 2. So we'll discuss it more in the conditions. The applicant has proposed that if they, as I understand it, and certainly you can ask if you would like to, that if there's an inability to make this berm tall enough on this boundary line between lot 1 and lot 2, that they would seek to go from, I believe it's 7 feet in the Country Estate District, up a little taller, up to 10 feet, to be able to make that work. The other one, of course, the unique aspect of this application is this multiple principal structure variation, which would allow for the proposed use of 2 accessory dwelling units on the property. I will say I had a conversation with Member Russell yesterday, and I do have to, I would illuminate a little bit for the PCZBA as it relates to our other discussions. There are really 2 lineages of how we've treated these types of structures in the village. The first is, let's call it the pool house approach, which is to treat it as a use and to make similar things a special use permit and to make a process. We've asked the applicant, and they've provided the materials to consider going down that road. The other approach, and it's actually used with some frequency up here, I confess I wasn't aware of it until we started researching this project, is to authorize multiple principal structures on a lot by a variation. And so there you consider the variation criteria, you consider if there's a hardship and practical difficulties and so on. And if so, you would authorize essentially multiple houses to be built. And some of those just happen to be subordinate to a main house. So those are your 4 variations. So what we've done, right, is when we're doing this review, we don't have unbridled discretion, if you would. We really have to make our conditions pretty tight to the variation standards and to the circumstances at hand. And so, for example, the village code doesn't ordinarily provide that when you subdivide, that you would have to set aside areas for tree protection or that you would have to dedicate areas into conservation. In this case, given the variation standards, given the really unique conditions that you're addressing by granting these variations, we have included some of these things as conditions. So the first big condition here is basically when there's no plans for Lot 1 yet. When there are plans for Lot 1, they would have to come back through for final approval. So just as you saw in our first application tonight, when an applicant comes seeking a variation for an architectural improvement, they provide site plans, they provide elevations, and so on. So those things don't exist here yet, but we've made a mechanism to make sure that you see them when they do exist, but you can still find the standards are met, you can go through that process today. And there's some conditions around what that site plan has to look like. It has to, and I'll just go through them, right? You have the 2 ADUs that are clearly subordinate to a larger dwelling unit. The size of each of those is limited to 7% of the permissible floor area ratio. That's a suggestion by the applicant. Again, you'd still have to meet floor area for the whole lot altogether. You'd have to provide screening around the accessory dwelling units. And then if they do build a fence or propose to build a fence up against Lot 2, they would have to bring you elevation details, a site plan showing that fence. And we've also said in here that within 20 feet of a lot line, that fence is going to have to meet the regular height requirement. So again, you're really keeping it just to where Lot 2 comes up against Lot 1 on that berm. If for some reason the applicant wouldn't proceed with those in a timely fashion or would choose not to do either and doesn't go through that plan review, those parts of the ordinance fall away. You still have a valid subdivision. You still have these 2 lots, and you'd only be able to develop them as a right. On Lot 1, again, just not wanting these to be used for other things, they'd have to be used as a single-family residence. They'd have to be kept in common ownership. On Lot 2, here in the near future, you'll see proposals that would make this subject to site plan review by the ABR already. We're proposing to impose that as a condition here. And then there's also some regulations around tree preservation. Basically, you're recommending to them that they preserve as many Class A and Class B trees as they can. Those are the highest quality species of trees in the village with an adequate condition. So understanding that there's going to be some substantial tree removal here when those plans are designed. After those are done, after the ABR reviews them, after they're built, the owner of that lot would enter into a covenant with the village saying that we don't have to approve them taking out any trees of that Class A or Class B size after this is done. It's a very, we think, high level of protection to keep most of this wooded area, the high quality trees in there, in a good condition. Now, of course, lower quality trees you could still remove, and any quality tree you'd have to pay to remove under the village's tree ordinance. That's really it. That's the big stuff. So that was a lot. I hope we tried to make it as digestible as possible, but I'm happy to answer any questions from the commissioners, or we can get into a discussion on the merits.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Cole. All right. Commissioners, anyone want to jump in?
Can I ask, if this is Member Russell, are there any neighbors that are queued up to comment?
Jack Keller, who was with Shore Acres, did identify himself and volunteered to contribute to the discussion if that's desired. I do see some neighbors here in the attendee list. No one has asked to speak yet, but certainly this would be a great time to identify yourself if you'd like to. So there's a raise your hand button there at the bottom of your screen, or a Q&A feature as well. And I'm still seeing none, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. Mr. Russell?
Okay, well, unfortunately, as I usually do, I have quite a few questions and comments. So I'll just plunge right in. First of all, clarification from the village attorney or staff in general, are we waiving the tentative plat, or are we actually approving a tentative plat and waiving all the numerous requirements that would normally go along with the tentative plat? Not really following what we're doing, and the title of the approving this project is unclear as to what we're doing.
Yeah, so the applicants provided a tentative and final plat of subdivision, as is relatively common, at least in my review of the village's past subdivisions. The ordinance we have here, at a technical level, waives tentative plat approval and approves the final plat for the property directly.
Okay. All right. First of all, yeah, so we're suggesting now that there be a 7% cap on the ADUs, results in a 2,716 square foot structure. Subtracting 2 of those from the total FAR still leaves the applicant the ability to build a 32,300 and change square foot primary residence, and I'm wondering, given that they're requesting 2 ADUs, if they're willing to live with a cap on their FAR, and if so, what that would be, or if they don't want any type of lowering of that 32,366.
Are you looking for a response now, or should we come back and respond to these later?
Whichever way the chair wants to handle it, I guess.
No, if you're prepared to respond now, Mr. Ailman, that'll be fine.
I defer to Mr. Crable. Liam, with a 7% cap on the 2 ADUs, Mr. Russell indicates you're left with 32,000 square feet of floor area ratio for the primary dwelling unit. Can you live with something less with a cap down to a lesser number?
Yes, absolutely. And you know, while we haven't, you know, finalized any proposed square footage yet, just to give you a rough order of magnitude, I think, you know, we were looking for the main residence to be in the range of, you know, 4,000 square feet, give or take. But, you know, so something dramatically smaller than what the I guess the ordinance allows for, if that helps.
If I can stick my 2 cents in, Liam, I would say I understand you're only looking for 4,000 or 5,000 square feet, but to protect yourself in case one day in the future, 10 or 15 years, you want to expand it, even if you capped it at 10,000 square feet, it's still 1/3 of the remaining 32,000 square feet. Mm-hmm. So I kind of looked to Mr. Russell. Does a 10,000 square foot cap sound like something that would appeal to the board?
Well, it would appeal to me. I wasn't even expecting a reduction that far, but I just thought that maybe some reduction was in order, given that you are asking for 2 extra residences, which are fairly good size. I mean, 2,700 square feet is, if you build them both to that. So,
yeah, I mean, I'm very open to reducing the amount of square feet allowed on the property line, and I fully appreciate. I'm not an architect. We have our architect on here, so I'm sure he would tell me to be a little conservative here, because I don't always maybe fully appreciate all that goes into how those square footage are calculated. But I mean, if it would help just to say go with take whatever it officially is and, you know, divide it in half with that. I mean, whatever makes, we're very flexible, whatever makes sense, but we're happy to work with you to come up with something that makes sense for the village.
Okay, well, from a personal level, cutting it to 16,000, you know, whatever it is, 188 or, yeah, half of the allowable, it's around 16,000 plus. I would certainly be in favor of that. On the other alternative, because the technical lot width of your lot is only 140 feet, our zoning code would limit your overall height of your house to 36 feet. And I would suggest as a matter of expediency that we go ahead and include a variation for height. Our zoning code for lots that are 225 feet and larger allows a 44-foot maximum of 44 feet. And I just know that most of the homes that are built in the E2 and E1 district, even in our village, they exceed 36 feet. If that counts, we measure from the ridge line to the grade, and rather than having to come back and do a whole complete separate variation, this lot, even though it's technically by definition only 140 feet wide, it's really
400.
a 400 foot wide. Yeah, I would support variation to allow it to be 44 feet because that's what our code allows on lots that are half this wide.
We accept your offer.
Okay, understand this is just me going through my comments. So.
And member Russell, you know, I understand your desire to potentially include additional variations. My recommendation would be not to include it at this time, purely because the public notice didn't call out that additional variation. And so I think that we would be putting the village, but more importantly, the applicant at risk of a challenge with that. Now, that said, there's nothing that prevents, once plans are put together, you know, if there's a desire or a need for other relief, you know, the applicant would always have a right to come back and ask. But in our notices, you know, there was nothing regarding a height of a building.
Okay, that makes absolute sense, Dan. I didn't consider that. And that's why we have you here. Okay, the next item has to do with the ADUs themselves. If in fact the ADUs do come in much smaller, very small structures are actually allowed, even in the country estate district, to get within 5 feet side yard property lines. And I would like to have a provision added in the ordinance and or on the plat combined that very clearly says, regardless of the size of the ADU, that the ADU shall comply with the principal structure setbacks.
I think we included that in our letter of application.
Okay, yeah, I don't think it's clear in the approval documents, but it should be checked.
Member Russell, if I may offer, so the applicant did offer that, suggest that in their letter of application, because, as you noted, structures over 1,000 square feet are subject to those restrictions anyway. We did not include that as a condition of approval. Certainly, if you wanted to include that as a condition of approval here, I think that's perfectly rational.
Okay. Well, both neighbors, most affected north and south with the last meeting, were told that it would be at least a 40-foot setback, and we don't know what size these units are going to come in at. So just to be clear and simple, it seems to me that's the rational thing to do. And then I guess I would point out, as I just did with any type of accessory structure in the country estate district, if it's small enough, really by small, even something in the 400 square foot range, it can sit within 5 feet of the side yard property line. And when we're having a project like this that's proposed to have 3 homes, sort of running north to south, I can envision the desire to want to place structures, smaller accessory structures, detached garages or whatever, very close to the side yard property lines. I think we need to look out for the neighbors here, and I think that there should be a larger accessory structure setback requirement for this particular project, so that we don't have the encroachment on the side yard property lines.
Are you
Hearing
proposing
none,
40 feet, George?
That's, if you ask me, that's what I would say would be the most appropriate.
And I fully agree with that, and I know for myself and for the neighbors, you know, I would, that's what we were planning for. So I'm very comfortable with that.
Okay. Thank you. And then on lot 2, the same question would apply. And actually lot 2, I was curious as to how the 40-foot setback was developed, because lot 2, even though it technically has a 20-foot width, it's really a 540-foot wide lot, excuse me. And so therefore, if that lot was fronting right on the public road without that little 20-foot strip, we'd have a 54-foot side yard setbacks. And I'm wondering where the 40-foot came from and why it shouldn't be 54, just to be consistent with how we would treat every other lot that size in the village. And it's not to say the golf course driving range, something at grade, can clearly go beyond the setback line, but this would be for any structures like this maintenance barn they're talking about, or the shelter for driving. I would suggest that to protect the residential property to the south, they know what the maintenance area looks like at the very north end of Shore Acres, that there needs to be a sort of rigid setback for these accessory structures, particularly along the south lot line, because over time, despite good intentions, the golf course might want to start putting stuff near the south lot line, and I think we should have a very specific requirement that doesn't allow them to do that, like it's done against the Navy fence up at the far north end. Material bins and all kinds of nice stuff. So I don't know if the golf course is in a position to respond to that. Because otherwise they can put anything they want within 5 feet of the lot line right now, or smaller, you know, up to 440 square feet, which is still a good size shed.
Well, you know, I guess technically right now I'm still the owner of that property. Jack Keller might be the better person to speak to that if that's possible, since he's the board president of Shore Acres.
I am. Go ahead.
If it's possible to have Jack on.
Yeah, I'm pulling Jack up right now. And then I'd also note, Mr. Keller, I apologize. Mr. Keller had asked to comment publicly before his name was brought up. And I'd also note Mr. George Covington is in the queue as well, whenever you'd like, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Mr. Keller, if you could state your name for the record.
Yes, my name is Jack Keller.
And do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Yeah, I mean, just to quickly address that question, we're comfortable with those setback rules. We don't have any plans to put any significant structures on the property. I think what we were thinking about was potentially a small shed to hold some maintenance equipment. I think for the practice field.
And some of that is, well, quite a bit of this is very much to be determined, but I think we can work with reasonable rules like that. And first, I was just going to comment on, as a future neighbor of the Craybills development. I think, as we discussed late last year, in the interest of time, I won't go into it at great length, but we're very comfortable with the size and the aesthetic of what they're planning to do, and you can tell from the square footage rules how much space they really do have to work with, and it seems like any of their variances that they're asking for on the accessory dwelling units would be more than adequate for us, and we're very comfortable with their plans.
Thank you, Mr. Keller.
Okay, thank you. Then the last comment I had about setbacks was following up on a question I had at the first meeting where we reviewed this. That was the not allow any accessory structure, sheds, detached garages, or the like on lot 1 in that upper pole portion of that area that would be due west of the Covington parcel. That there be a restriction in the approval documents and on the plat that does not allow accessory structures in that 140-foot wide segment of the lot.
I don't think that's an issue. In fact, you touched on that in your minutes that you went over at the beginning of the meeting. But there were no plans really to put any accessory buildings in the pole section of the flag lot.
That's right.
Okay. The next question I have has to do with the plat at this point not showing a public utility easement for the possible future extension of water and sewer. The village has a long-standing conceptual plan for if and when the time comes, if the levels of water keep dropping in Lake County, and decades from now we have to convert the area to public water. Been easements that have been created from Blodgett Road all through most of 4 acres through the other public roadway to the north of, Crabtree Farm. And I don't see any provision for that. And Glenn, I think you had referenced somewhere along the line that you were going to speak to that tonight, but that is the type of easement that should absolutely, in my mind, be shown on a plat of subdivision.
Certainly, Member Russell. So as a little bit of history to that, we had requested that from the applicants, and I believe they addressed that to some extent in their letter of application. There was a question raised, I think validly, that some of the approval documents for the Catawba subdivision back in the 90s may have already granted that easement. And so we had spent some time researching that issue in the past few days. And I believe the applicant indicates in their letter they'd be willing to rededicate it if we wanted to. We still haven't completely nailed that down. It looks like we may have rights on along the Arden Shores road alignment going east-west, but we're thinking that we don't have what we're looking for on that north-south axis. Again, we're still trying to really dial that one in, both because we want to make sure that we don't already have that. Certainly we got it. We know for sure we got it for part of the Catawba subdivision at that time. But also, as you can see on the plat, that existing easement is set back quite a bit to the east. And certainly I think it would make sense for that easement to try to follow the western line of Lot 1 here to the extent that it can, perhaps. These are just some details we haven't had a chance to hammer out with the village engineer. Certainly if you wanted to, it seems the applicant's willing to provide that. If you wanted to make that a condition of your recommendation, no issue at all with that. And certainly that's an issue we plan to resolve before this goes for final action with the village board.
if I could just add to your comments, there's a call out in the title policy for an easement that was granted to the village of Lake Bluff expressly for this purpose in 1998 when Catawba did the 2-lot subdivision. And I'm not sure exactly where the easement is, and it's not clear from the call out, the title commitment, but I believe the Kellers have that municipal utility easement north-south along their western lot line, which would dovetail almost perfectly into the western portion of our lot 1. So I see no problem in us providing a continuation of that easement north all the way up through the flagpole of our lot. Oh, there it is. So we'd have to zigzag it along our southern boundary over to the western boundary and then north, and then it would tie right into Shore Acres Road, the 90-degree turn on Shore Acres Road.
Yeah,
But, yeah, we could provide that. That might require some directional boring underneath a berm at that point in time, but that's not a big deal.
And certainly, part of one of the issues we're waiting on is trying to get some opinion from the village engineer as far as, with a main of this diameter, how much tolerance that has for 90-degree turns, or, how much can we convolute it in a relatively short span of space. So those are some of the questions we're trying to nail down.
Well, if we tried to keep it straight and just angle it over to the flagpole, then you'd have to talk to George Covington about bringing it up through that western portion of his lot as well.
But Mike, this is Nick. Ideally, we were going to try and have it reside within that setback that's shown on the screen now. And if there's gentler turns necessary with, composites of 45 degrees to get to the 90-degree turn, we can easily do that within the 40-foot setback. The utility easement is on the Keller property, I believe, only the 20-foot wide portion.
Yeah, that's what they typically are.
Right. So it's not. There's some elbow room within that building setback, so to speak, that we'd be able to maneuver, and it's not just tied up against the wall here.
Right. Yeah, but conceptually, we're totally amenable to providing that.
Okay. So Glenn, I think it's an important issue that the village shouldn't lose sight of. It's been a 30-plus year project. And it would be a shame not to nail it down.
If you want to bring the water, if you want to bring the water and sewer up right away, that would work for us.
Yeah, well, I hate to tell you, the village's policy is, at least it used to be, when those are expanded, the residents pay for it all.
Interest rates are really low right now.
Anyway, to move along, I'm sorry. The plat, in my opinion, absolutely needs to show the access easement for Lot 1. It doesn't show that right now. All that we have is a comment from Glenn in his staff report that the easement's been secured. That's an elementary part of any plat. If it needs access to get into the lot, we need to show that drawn legally on the plat of subdivision going across the Shore Acres property, and then there needs to be some sort of other legal indication that the owner of Lot 1 actually has the right to use Shore Acres Drive. So that's a different easement, but those two elements should definitely be on the plat and maybe even repeated in the approval documents, because otherwise Lot 1 is left high and dry, and it shouldn't be something that's waived. I mean, there's a lot of little stuff we're going to waive on these plats, but that's important. Public safety purposes, I was very surprised to see it was maybe being suggested that the address for Lot 1 would be an Arden Shore address, because the primary driveway is going to be off Shore Acres Drive, and generally, I'd be surprised if you asked the fire department that specific question, that they wouldn't want that lot to have a Shore Acres Drive address, because that is the road where the normal access is going to be, and there's no telling what condition that little maintenance road or whatever it's going to be along the south edge of Lot 2 will be, 10 years after the subdivision's built, the driving range is built. So might want to follow up on that one.
Yeah,
I did have a question.
I would certainly say that's just a placeholder. We typically don't assign addressing until after we go to record a plat. So we're hoping to have those picked out for the ordinance for vanity purposes in this case, but ours, not Mr. Kriebel's or anyone. But it's good to have a point of reference aside from just a subdivision name sometimes. So that's the stub there in the ordinance.
Okay, and then a question about the 10-foot variation for the fence. It's clear to the applicant that would be 10 feet from pre-construction grade, not a fence height on top of a berm or half a berm. If it's, if there's a 5-foot berm, you can only have a 5-foot fence if you give him a 10-foot variation. If he wants a 10-foot fence on a 5-foot berm, then he needs a 15-foot variation. So that should be cleared before, it's finally approved by the board.
Yes, and that was my understanding, 10 feet from grade. That's right.
Okay.
Well,
and then,
well, I would interject there, Member Russell. There are other parts of our code. We looked at this issue a bit. Perhaps there's something else you're referring to. There are other parts of our code that have restrictions based on the pre-existing grade. We did not find that language in the fence regulations.
okay. I'm almost done. The one thing that I don't see addressed in the document at all is the issue of impact fees for the 2 ADUs. I know the intention right now is for these 2 ADUs to be used as guest cottages, so to speak, but at some point they could revert to full-time rental by some future owner. And right now, even if someone in the village had a two-bedroom apartments added, we would be charging impact fees of $20,000 each. And seems to me that the staff needs to nail that down before it goes to the board, what the expectation would be and how this would be tracked. When and if the time comes where Mr. Kriebel would sell the property or the situation changes and the ADUs become rentals where a full-time family is living there, it would seem that the impact fee would apply, and there's nothing at all to address that.
Sure.
We talk about the impact fees if a home would be built on Lot 2 in the future, but nothing about the ADU impact fees, potentially when the situation changes.
Sure. So I say this, of course, there's a great deal of, it's up to the village board to determine how they apply this. This certainly isn't an interpretation on behalf of the village. Right now, if you look at the impact fee section, it talks in there about, when you have a multifamily property or multifamily building, it's tied to the dwelling unit. When you're creating lots, it's tied to the lots. And so certainly that is consistent with what we see in other communities. We were asked by the village board, this is a policy discussion, not so much here, but we were asked by the village board to review instances from our ADU discussion. You'll recall instances where other communities are charging. What are they charging for impact fees? We weren't able to locate that, at least here in Chicagoland. And then, again, we have done this style of variation elsewhere in the village, and authorizing multiple principal structures. That is sort of a historic condition, right? This is perhaps a first impression where this is authorizing new construction, but we were not able to locate impact fees being assessed in those situations either. So there's been some review directed to that.
Okay. And maybe this is something that's handled at the time of the golf driving range approval, since that's going to come back to us, but it would be nice to get the prohibition against any lights on that facility to protect the neighbors. I know the golf course has indicated it would not be operated at night, but you know, we can't really rely on minutes. And maybe the intention is when the golf course comes back through our second review, we would nail those requirements down, and the requirement that if that well that's in the middle of the property is not going to be used, that be properly abandoned and filled like the environmental regulations would require it to be. Anyway, that's it. Thanks for listening.
Oh, thank you, Member Russell.
I would.
Sounds reasonable to short.
I would clarify one last thing, Member Russell, to your comments. The Lot 1 final plan will come back through you. The way we have it drafted is that it would go to the Plan Commission and then the board, just as though a variation would. I would emphasize that as it's written right now, no development on Lot 2 would come back to this body. So that would just go to the Architectural Board of Review. And that is,
okay.
Yeah. A golf course is a permitted use in this area.
So however the village deems it best, you know, we want to deal from a position of strength, and there's not a promise that there won't be lights. We should, in my opinion, we should get that nailed down sooner rather than later.
No objection there. Just wanted to make sure there wasn't confusion about the process.
All right, other commissioners.
After Talia talking, after George's presentation, I think I'm speechless. I wouldn't know really what to add or add in addition. My feeling is that all this should be incorporated into another document, and then have a discussion about this at a future date. It's just a lot to take in one sitting. That's what I'm saying.
I guess, Elliot, I'd ask a question. I thank George for all of the questions. They're great clarifying questions. But are these things that they sound more to me as administrative cleanup that the applicant has agreed to, not things that would change our you know, how we see this. That's kind of how I see it. And so, yes, I agree those things should get done, and you know, further and more detailed documentation needs to be created before the board would approve. Personally speaking, given the fact that the applicant was agreeable to everything, I don't think I need to wait on seeing all those things from my perspective.
Yeah, and Dave, if you were asking me that question, I agree. I think staff took notes on everything, and it's just to help solidify a lot of smaller questions that I don't think were addressed in some of the materials, all the accessory structure setbacks and the like. And I'm personally totally happy with staff following through.
We leave it to the village staff to say that all these items, which is a substantial number, are in the document. I kind of like the idea of just going back to it. It shouldn't take us very long, but this is a chance to think about all that you said. And, you know, for me, to make an intelligent decision, I certainly don't have enough information at this point. I'd like to hear other members what they think.
Yeah, thank you, Member Miller. Member Danley.
So thorough. We had a workshop. We had a presentation. We agreed that the far better than any other previous ones that we've seen in various years. We have one country estate being built with some ADUs. We're still going to have a chance to have that come before us. I agree with the members that a lot of this will be administrative and cleaned up, and moving forward for them to move ahead is something I would encourage.
Thank you, Member Danley. Member Ryder.
Yes, I agree that this plan should move forward. It, makes probably the best use one could imagine, really, out of this particular property. So, and I understand that there's provisions for retaining the best of the trees, and that our ordinances will cover that time that the golf course does its work there. I think that's very important, as I'm sure others do as well. I wanted to just ask a question of the commissioners: how, if at all, the permission of these ADUs impacts our future ADU discussions. I don't want to somehow box ourselves in on where we head with the ADU process elsewhere. As far as I can tell, there's no reason why this would change that discussion at all, but I just wanted to test my understanding of that. Will this somehow set us up for a decision one way or another on the ADUs, or is it completely unimpactful on the ADU question more broadly?
Yeah, Ben, do you want to address that?
I'm always asking Ben questions. Yes, Ben.
Well, in terms of future discussions of ADUs, this doesn't set any precedent for what you're going to do. You're going to have a policy discussion on, and you have been having that policy discussion on ADUs. So the question is whether you are hesitant to approve this until something is before you and the code's amended fully to address all the ADU issues, and that's really the question. I think that from our perspective and staff's perspective, this is before you now versus waiting because there's an applicant who has submitted an application, and we don't know when we're going to complete the policy discussions and all the issues that go with ADUs more generally. Certainly, the lot, the size of the lot. I think there's different issues here than there may be in other zoning districts and other situations. And I would expect that any discussions in the future you have over ADUs are going to be quite detailed and quite lengthy. So I don't know if that fully answers your question.
Yeah, it does. I just want to make sure that we're not just jumping ahead here in a way that we'll 6 months from now wish we hadn't. Anything is possible, of course, but I'm just trying to understand if one impacts the other at all.
And that's a decision to be made by this body. If you think that you need, before you approve anything, you want to have the ADU policy discussion first and fully flesh that out, that is your prerogative. Your code does not currently provide an absolute right to an ADU right now. You could tell the applicant that the applicant should wait until you have that discussion. The other piece of this, though, and I would say this just, I think it's from a good policy making standpoint, is that this lot, presents some unique circumstances, and every lot does for that matter. But when you have the bigger ADU conversation, I think a lot of your conversation should not be too tilted with this project in mind. Because most lots in the village are not this size. You are going to be talking about zoning districts that are very different. And I think the issues that you have when dealing with a garage, space above a garage, present different issues perhaps than this as well. So it's really up to you to decide what you think you need to make the decisions. You have an application before you. But there's no right to, in this situation, to the relief. So it's kind of a judgment call of what you think is the best way to get to the end result.
Understood. Thanks.
I have another quick question, or maybe it's not so quick. But can we put in some language to say that these cannot be rentals part of the approval process?
I think that you can. I would talk to the applicant about whether, I'm
not concerned about the applicant. I'm more concerned about if the property gets sold.
Right. So one of the conditions that we did put in here is that it would be under common, there's two things. One, common ownership, so it can't be split, the ADUs to a different owner. And the other one that we put in here was, it's subordinate to the largest dwelling, not, meaning not independent. But that said, if you think it would be appropriate to put something that's saying this cannot be rented out, you could do so.
I think that.
What is your thought behind that? I'd like to get your thoughts. Is one of the reasons that we were talking about accessory dwelling units was to create alternative housing options. Not to say that would happen on this property, but just as a concept.
Let me clarify that it shouldn't be a short-term rental. Or it has to abide by the short-term rental guidelines that we have in place. That's going to come back to us at some point. And I think this is a perfect example of what a future can bring. If somebody comes in and says, well, I'm going to buy the property, I'm going to build this, my house is here, I'm just going to do these short-term rentals. I don't think we should be making that decision now. So maybe, I guess it really depends on what the village is going to be like 10 years from now with short-term rentals. Maybe this whole question is silly at the moment. It's the moot point.
It seems to me we can address it the same way as we address other short-term rentals. Whatever rules apply to that should apply to this.
Member Miller, if I may, if I'm hearing your question right, I'd offer a couple things. So one, right now, the village's current short-term rental rules would prohibit these from being used as short-term rentals. We're jumping ahead to my staff report and what Ms. Havern talked about during public comment, but those rules will be coming back to you to make essentially standing regulations of the village at your meeting next month. So that's likely to be the case for the future. Again, these things can always change. What I would say
I withdraw my comment.
I would note too, though, that these things can change as you're thinking about this. For example, as you're thinking about what policies might apply in the future. Let me give you a hypothetical. So if you were to say now, you have these accessory dwelling units, you can't use them as rentals. Down the road, you make accessory dwelling unit regulations, they're permissive of rentals. It's a lot. You could still go back and the applicant could apply and amend this, and there's costs involved, but it's a lot harder to change conditions like this when they end up as conditions of zoning relief or as conditions of a plat. It's much easier to impose those restrictions.
It was just a thought. it really doesn't apply here, as I can see.
No, I think it was a very well-made point. I just, to member Ryder's comment as well, and I'm sure that'll be a recurring theme, just something to think about in the intersection of this case and your bigger policy discussion.
Thank you.
From a procedural perspective, what can we accomplish tonight? From my perception this evening, the representations made by Mr. Edelman and by and by the other representatives of the petitioner all have paralleled the representations made during last December's presentation. Obviously, that was a presentation. This is a formal petition, but I'd like to think we can do something tonight, maybe to move this process along.
Certainly, I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, before entertaining that, it did come in late after the commissioner discussion started, but we still have one person wishing to testify.
Please identify yourself for the record.
Mr. Covington, you're able to speak to us when you're ready.
Good evening. My name is George Covington, and I live just north of the property. I've been there for about 40 years. I've seen a lot of plans in the past. Rick Swanson had a pretty conventional and bad plan for 25 houses on the property. I've seen a lot of clustered plans for as many as a dozen or more houses on what would be lot 1. This is by far the best plan I've ever seen, and my wife and I enthusiastically endorse it. In our minds, it is completely consistent with the philosophy of the CE district, and in many cases, because of Crabtree Farm particularly, the overall density in the CE district is far less than one house per 200,000 square feet. This would continue that very low density approach. I'm also pleased it protects the wetlands. It provides a better golf practice area for shore acres, which involves an element of safety, because more than one person has been hit. If you're as bad a golfer as I am, you're likely to slice into the driveway and hit a car. And then I haven't done it, but I do know people who have hit cars or have been hit by cars. My only tweaks on this plan would be there are a lot of really magnificent trees on the property, both on lot 1, but particularly on lot 2. And I would certainly hope that everything feasible could be done to preserve those trees. If any have to be replaced, I would hope that they also would be replaced on this property, not on the adjoining golf course. I think that would be sort of self-defeating if they can be moved onto the adjoining property. They should be replaced. Trees removed on lot 1 should be replaced on lot 1, and similarly with lot 2. And last, I would hope that you'd have some covenants about natural area management for the wetlands. I talked to the wetlands were delineated by several different wetland delineators, and I talked to a couple of them, and all said these are really remarkably high quality and unusual wetlands. With all due respect to golf course groundskeepers and golf course management, they're not very good at preserving natural areas. They're very good at growing turf grass. So I hope there's some covenants that would mandate appropriate natural area management for these wetlands. Other than that, we're enthusiastic about this plan. It's certainly the best one I've ever seen. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Covington. Any other comments from the commissioners? Okay. Realistically, what can we accomplish tonight?
You know, from what we've heard, you know, I think we have a short list of additional conditions here that we would roll in. So going from Member Russell's commentary, we'll continue to look at the height limit. I don't think, for the reasons the village attorney talked about, I don't think we can roll that in here. I think I have here that for lot 1, that you would apply the principal, put succinctly, the principal structure setbacks would apply to all structures on the lot, and that you would prohibit structures in the pole part of the flag. You would condition your approval of the tentative and final plat on, assuming it's legal, that that access easement being reflected on the plat, and also our utility easement. Again, both things that we can resolve before this is considered by the village board. On lot 2, I think we would agree that if done properly according to zoning, the current zoning on the lot, that setback would be larger, that would be 54 feet on each side. I think that's really a drawing thing. And then again, that setback would apply to all structures on the lot. And Member Russell, I defer to you if I missed anything in your commentary there, but those were the conditions I heard. Again, no objection to any of those. I would think if you would like to make a recommendation for approval with those, and the floor area limit. The floor area limit will be an important one. That is certainly an important one.
What was that, Glenn?
The floor area limit, the reduced floor area on lot
right.
1.
You know, before somebody makes a recommendation, may I respond to some of the comments made by the various commissioners?
Certainly.
And then they're primarily Mr. Russell's. And the dialogue's terrific because you throw a lot of things out that maybe some of us didn't foresee, and we kick around ideas, and it makes the whole process better. 7% cap on the ADUs is something I believe the commissioners are amenable to. Relative to a cap on the main residence that Mr. Russell suggested, yeah, if we cap it at half of what the residual FAR is, that works for us. We did not foresee that because of the reduced frontage that we have on our flag lot, that our ridge height would be an issue, and I respect Mr. Schuster's thinking about it. It wasn't noticed up as a variation, but appreciate if you keep your minutes and notate in bold that it's something you would favorably consider when we come back with the application for permits for the house, just in case we need that variation for ridge height. The ADU side yard setbacks, that's fine. The other accessory building setbacks, keeping them at 40 feet. I believe Liam said he could live with that, although from my perspective, 20 feet would be better, but if the applicant can live with 40, so be it. The 54-foot side yard setbacks on lot 2, I think that's fine to the south and to the north. I believe the applicant was happy with the 40-foot side setback on the boundary line between lots 1 and lot 2. We're agreeable to no accessory buildings in the pole section of the lot 1 flag lot. An issue raised was that the plat doesn't show the easement. If you look at that survey, the easement's going to be the west 70 feet of the existing driving range. The only reason, I shouldn't say the only reason, a primary reason why it's not shown on the plat now is because the attorneys for Shore Acres, Meltzer, Pertil, et al., they're drafting the two easements, the easement off of Shore Acres Road and then the construction easement and emergency easement that we're going to be provided along the south 20 feet of Lot 2. And they're in the process of drafting them now. Until they do, and then we get Bleck Engineering involved in calling out a legal description that he could put on the plat. But that's all administrative. I mean, everything so far that we're talking about is administrative that we can work out with Glenn and the rest of the staff engineering. As to the address, it's news to me that Lot 1 isn't going to be a Shore Acres Road address. I don't believe it was ever going to be an Arden Shore address. Yeah, the 10-foot variation for the fence, and fence is kind of a generic term for it because Bill Liederbach, our architect, has given us some pretty interesting ideas for a fence, a wood and stone fence, some examples he provided from England where they have them, which I think once we present them to you graphically, will raise your eyebrows like, wow, that's pretty terrific. So we're not talking a 10-foot wooden stockade fence. We're talking something pretty extraordinary if we pursue the fence. Impact fees. In my experience, it's always tied to the lot, not to the number of ADUs. But again, it becomes a policy issue for you folks because if you're going to tie them to the ADUs, then you are setting a precedent going forward for other ADUs that you legislate like Bluff. But in my experience as a former plan commissioner in Lake Forest and alderman, we charge impact fees based on the increase in the number of lots. So in this instance, we're only creating one additional lot. So in Lake Forest, we would charge impact fees for just one additional lot. I did a 4-lot subdivision for the Swifts last year in Lake Forest out of a 4-acre parcel. We paid 3 impact fees, and then we spread it over the 4 purchasers for the lot. The lights, the no lights, I'm pretty sure, and Lean, you can refresh my memory, and Nick, you too. I believe we've agreed with Shore Acres there aren't going to be lights in the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that run with the land. Are going to address the light issue and some other issues as to the rights and obligations of the parties. And again, Meltzer Pertil is drafting the CCRs and will present them to the village for their review and approval before we finalize those. So I don't think there's anything we can't do here administratively. We're the easiest guys in the world to get along with. I need to underscore, we're not developers like the previous people. George Cummington mentioned Rick Swanson. I know Tom Swarthout had something going. There have been other interested parties in this land who are developers, profit motivated. You're looking at 2 end users here, Lean Crable and Shore Acres, and they are 2 of the finest end users the village could ever hope to land on this 26-acre parcel of land. I think it's going to be a spectacular end product a couple of years from now, looking back at it. Rentals, I know Mr. Miller talked about rentals and precluding them, and then he withdrew it. And again, that's a policy issue, because if you want to preclude rentals on these ADUs, and Lean has no interest in renting them, then you're going to have to do that to all ADUs. But bigger picture, the 30,000 foot view is, these ADUs are going to be subject to whatever ADU regulation Lake Bluff develops, and possibly tweaks and modifies and re-legislates in the future. So I agree with Glenn. There's no point putting a restrictive covenant in a plat as to the use of the ADUs. They're going to be governed by your legislation in due course. That's pretty much all I have. Yeah. So I turn it back to you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Edelman. On this particular matter, we're gonna be be a recommending body to the village board. I think we've identified a number of topics. I won't necessarily call them issues, but a number of, critical points that we've identified, but as it's been testified to, it seems as though many of those are administrative. So from my perspective, and it's simply one perspective on the commission, I'd be a proponent of trying to move some sort of recommendation forward this evening if we can.
Member Russell here. I move that we recommend to the village board that they approve a final plat of subdivision for the proposed project. They waive the requirements for the tentative plat of subdivision, and that they approve the accompanying ordinance as drafted with the provision that all the administrative changes that we've talked about tonight and agreed upon be incorporated into the document.
I second that.
To be clear with the motion, because you mentioned the subdivision, but also its approval of the variations, correct?
Yes, I said the ordinance, but that is the variation, right?
Yep, just to clarify. Thank you.
Any further discussion among the commissioners? Hearing none, can we have a vote, please?
Certainly. Member Burns.
Aye.
Member Miller. Mr. Miller, I believe you are muted.
Aye.
Member Ryder.
Aye.
Member Russell.
Aye.
Member Danley.
Aye.
Chair Peters.
Aye.
All right. Mr. Adelman, I'll regroup with you and the team here in the near future. There may be the possibility to have this on the village board's agenda as soon as Monday, but with these changes, we might be better served waiting for February 8th. But again, I'll give you a call tomorrow about that.
Okay, we'll work with you to the best of our ability, Glenn. And if it's not till February 8th, so be it. But thank you all very much for your time and your thoughtful consideration.
No, thank you.
Everybody, we really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Good luck.
Thank
you.
Thank
you all. Take care.
At all.
All right. Agenda item number 6, public hearing to clarify country club golf courses in the CE zoning district. Mr. Cole, if you want to give a brief overview, please.
Certainly. So, very short, these current regulations about country club golf courses use a term tract that's undefined. It's pretty vague in the code. These regulations date back at least to the 80s, we believe, possibly earlier, based on just the revisions in the code. Actually, the plat you have here resolves this immediate issue. Again, very, very technically, this very long 20-foot corridor goes around into an incorporated area, and it's more contiguous than we expected this plat would be. But we still think it's a good idea just to clarify that applications like the type you see here are contiguous. A country club golf course is a permitted use on a lot such as Lot 2 that you're seeing here, because it is part of 120 acres, even where some of that is outside the village, and so by extension, some of that land is outside the CE zoning district. So it's a technical clarification, but an important one, and one we wanted to put through here.
In this instance, again, we're a recommending body. Any discussion from the commissioners?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Glenn, George Russell here, can you clarify specifically what the text amendment is?
Yeah,
Proposed text amendment?
it may be simplest just to look at that, just to look at the ordinance. So again, I would say our interpretation now would be that a tract, is that 120 acres of shore acres, but just out of an abundance of clarity. Oh, go ahead.
Okay, if I may, so in our code, we allow this golf course, but it has to be on a 120-acre tract. The code is silent on the issue of what happens if a piece of that tract is an unincorporated territory and not in the village boundary. We think the meaning of the code would be you look at the tract, and it's 120 acres, regardless of how much is in and outside of the village. And this is just purely a clarity issue to make sure that there's no ambiguity that you can have a golf course even if it's not entirely within the village boundary. And here we have a weird situation because of where this is located. There's a slight overlap into unincorporated territory. It's not meant to change the intent of the code. It's not meant to change any substantive provision. It's just to make sure that there's no confusion and nobody could try to argue with what we're doing.
Thank you. Part is not in the village.
The principal part of Lot 2, the main body of it is in the village. It would only be connected to that 120 acres by going through land that's not in the village. Again, that 20-foot access corridor changes that analysis a little bit. Again, you can go through, that means part of Lot 2 is contiguous. If you go through an unincorporated part, it's very confusing, and we think the simplest answer is to clean it up.
I won't go any more detail, that's fine.
Any further discussion among the commissioners? Hearing none, is there a motion?
Chair Peters, before you take a motion, I would suggest that you ask to see if there's any members of the public, since this is a public hearing on a text amendment.
Glenn, any public comment on this particular issue?
We're not seeing any. Certainly, if you're here with us and you'd like to make a comment, there's a raise hand button or a question and answer button there at the bottom of your screen.
Okay. Hearing none or seeing no activity from the public. Any further discussion from the commissioners? Do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
I was going to say, okay, so I move to recommend that the village board adopt the proposed text amendment.
Thank you, Member Burns. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, could we have a vote, please?
Certainly. Member Burns.
Aye.
Member Miller.
Aye.
Member Danley.
Aye.
Member Ryder.
Aye.
Member Russell.
Aye.
Chair Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Staff report, agenda item number 7.
Yeah, quite a few items. We'll keep it quick. Our ADUs, the theme of the evening. Unfortunately, last fall we thought it was important. You'll recall we thought it was important to have some drawings, some examples of ADUs on sites in the village to look at before our next discussion. We thought we had some pro bono assistance lined up for that, and that didn't quite pan out. So we've retained a local architect/planner to perform, again, the same program we had been discussing. 3 example lots in the village. We're looking at 1 in the R4 district, 1 in the terraces, and then 1 in perhaps the estates, in the southeastern part of town. Again, looking to have her prepare those 3 examples and perhaps to bring those to us. I'm forecasting in our March meeting. We'll have those drawings ready, and she'll probably join us for a policy discussion, and we can pick that subject back up. So again, I apologize for the delay in that. I always have trouble saying no to free help. Didn't quite pan out this time, but we look forward to concluding that discussion. Short-term rentals, as you heard, the village board directed us a couple weeks ago, I should say the committee of the whole directed staff to set in motion a process that would make permanent the village's beekeeping, chicken keeping, and short-term rental pilot programs. And by permanent, I mean standing regulations of the village. So on Monday night, they will formally refer that to this body. Again, we're anticipating a public hearing on that in February. No new updates regarding Stonebridge. You'll recall a few months ago, the village board directed us to begin, again, staff to begin the process of reviewing the village's planned residential developments. Myself, Chair Peters, and others participated in some finalist interviews with some planning firms earlier. Was that last Friday, Gary, I believe?
Last Friday. That's
last
correct.
Friday. And so we're moving towards a decision on that, which will be certainly very, Chair Peters, you hear from these guys less than I do, so perhaps you have a more objective opinion, but I thought very impressive.
Oh, there were a series of excellent presentations, a lot of strong talent submitted proposals, and I think Drew and members of the team are working through the vetting process now.
Yes, so stay tuned for the next steps there. And then finally, looking at some recent recommendations from this group, I did want to note, it's been quite a while, but back in November, you recommended some changes to underground garages to the village board. Those were accepted with a couple of modifications, one being an engineer's certification about flooding and the other being a waiver of liability. But again, those changes were adopted. I suppose the last comment I would make is, as we're thinking, not with our application hats, but policy hats, there's certainly, I think we'll continue to come back to this Arden Shores development for ideas, not just about ADUs, but maybe for other places that we can strengthen our code to. It's always good to make proactive improvements. And I guess for the sake of time, I'll cut my thoughts off there. But thank you again all for your time and your hard work tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Commissioner's report. Any additional
I
comments?
just have one question for Glenn. Glenn, can you send the short-term rental issue to, say, the ABR or the HPC instead of us?
I'm sorry. I'm not sure I understood the question, Member Russell, and I'm not sure that I want to. Understood.
All right. Any further discussion?
Can we vote on that? Would that be a legitimate vote?
I'm just going to hide underneath the dais now.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So said. I approve. I have motion to adjourn.
Second? Thank you, Member Danley.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Has to be a roll call.
Yep.
Got to roll call it since we're on Zoom. I apologize, guys. Member Burns.
Yep.
Member Miller.
Aye.
Member Danley.
Aye.
Member Ryder.
Aye.
Member Russell.
Aye.
Chair Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Well, thank you very much. We got off to a robust start in 2021, so I think we'll have a busy year ahead of us. Have a good night.
Have a good week, everybody.
Thank you.
You
Bye.
too. Thank you.
Bye.
Pretty good workout for the first meeting of 2021.